G'day, mate. 40 here. It's hard to go on the platform X these days without seeing discussion of Lily Phillips, who's an OnlyFans model and the subject of a YouTube documentary about her having sex with 101 men in one day. As part of her OnlyFans production, she makes millions of dollars a month on OnlyFans. And I was just thinking that unless you're religious or unless you are a part of a distinct, high-intensity, traditional in-group, it's really hard to make a case that what Lily Phillips is doing is morally wrong. So if you're a Christian, if you're a Jew, if you're a Muslim, if you're part of any prominent religious tradition of which I'm aware, then you can go to the religious text, right? You can go to the religious rule book, right? You can go to the religious Bible, and you can find all sorts of condemnations of fornication. So male sexuality is wild, right? Men will basically stick it into anything if that is socially acceptable. And the way that you have civilization is that you restrict male opportunities to stick it in to preferably just their opposite sex spouse, and then ensure that men stick around to raise kids. And then you encourage men to use their energy and their drive, right, for other purposes aside from just sticking it in as many women as possible. And without that, right, men will just dissipate themselves. When I came to Los Angeles at age 27, and I just had a ball. All right, I was being very social with a lot of different women, and that wasn't probably good for them, probably not the best for me, and certainly not good for civilization. You want to restrict male sexuality, as Dennis Prager talks about. You take the male sexual genie and you put it in the marital bottle, and then you harness that energy and drive to get something done. And yesterday I was talking all about Buffett identity. All right, explain Buffett identity and liberalism. I put this into Grok. And so it's the distinction between the porous self and the Buffett self. So my identity is porous. All right, what's going on around me has a profound effect. What's going on with my neighbors, with people at synagogue, with people at my favorite coffee shops, with people at my favorite sports bars, people that I work with, people at readings and writer groups that I go to. All right, what's going on with them affects me. And I have not had a face-to-face conversation today, but I carry with me an ongoing conversation with the people who are most important to me. When I get up in the morning and I'm listening to a podcast, all right, I'm thinking about which of my friends would be interesting to discuss this with. So myself is very porous. It's open. It's wide open. People are constantly affecting me, even if I'm not interacting with them face to face, right? When I'm alone in my room reading a book or watching a movie or messing around on social media, I'm thinking about things that I want to tell my friends, or where I'd like to tap their expertise, or I think about how would my friends, how would my community react to what I'm saying. So I'm vulnerable. Right? What goes on with the people who are most important to me has a profound effect on me, and it's very painful for me when I go against what they believe in and what they stand for. I'm willing to do that. All right, I'll pay a considerable price for my freedom of expression, but it hurts, man. It hurts when I go against the people who are most important to me. And so I think the single simplest, best moral guide in life is to ask yourself, how would I feel if my words and my actions were accurately reported on the front page of the New York Times? Most people would not want to be known for cheating and stealing and misleading people and deceiving people and manipulating people. Most people would not want that on the front page of the New York Times. Most people would not want to be quoted on the front page of the New York Times using highly disparaging words about other people and other groups. And most people would not want to be on the front page of the New York Times or the subject of a YouTube documentary that's been viewed about 2 million times by now, but having sex with 100 people in one day. So if you're part of a small community, right? You live in the country, you have a small number of people in your life, it would be impossible to be an OnlyFans model. All right, this is really only possible with the anonymity that a big city allows us, which is something of an evolutionary mismatch, because we evolved over hundreds of thousands of years within tight tribal conditions. And so you would spend your life from birth to death with pretty much the same number of 20, 30, 40, maybe 100 people. And that would pretty much be it. I like what Ed Dutton wrote on this story. OnlyFans Brit, who banged 100 men in one day, is kind of our fault. Interesting perspective here.
OnlyFans Brit, who banged 100 men in one day, is kind of our fault. On the 19th of October 2024, 23-year-old OnlyFans sensation Lillian Daisy Phillips rented out an Airbnb in Chelsea in order to have sex with 100 of her subscribers, of which she has 36,000, in a single day. Over a period of 12 hours, including occasional sustenance breaks, Phillips congressed with each of these enthusiastic fellows, one of them had flown all the way from Switzerland, for approximately 5 minutes each. With every one of them having a documented STD test, she filleted them until they were fully erect, had penetrative sex with them for 5 minutes, and then manually stimulated them until they ejaculated over her face.
So a whole bunch of men would be quite happy to do this if their face were disguised. All right. Many men will essentially risk anything for sex with an attractive young woman. And Lillian Phillips is an attractive young woman, right? She's an 8 or a 9. And for most people, effectively, she's a 10 out of 10, right? You'd have to be somewhat blasé to rate her as less than 10 out of 10. And I remember the first time I had sex with a porn star, and I told Paul Fishbein, the publisher of Adult Video News, oh, I got my first porn star blowjob, and he said, I only have one question for you. And guess what his question was? Were you safe? And so that's the liberal perspective on life. All right. Are you following your own happiness, and are you getting along with other people? And so if that's your primary moral standard, are you following your own bliss, and are you getting along with other people? Then it's hard to argue that Lily Phillips did anything wrong. And so when he said, are you safe? He didn't mean psychologically, spiritually. He meant physically. Did I wear a condom? Yes, I wore a condom. Now, men and women are not equally susceptible to getting STDs. All right. Women are far more vulnerable to getting STDs than men are. And so everyone was tested, but who knows what the men might have done after the tests. And it's just incredible to think that someone could do this and expect that there would be no repercussions to her health.
In many cases, some of their semen made it into her eyes, meaning that at the conclusion of her copulatory marathon, her eyes were stinging. The stench of gentleman relish was so potent by the end that the cameraman, who was filming a YouTube documentary on this extravaganza entitled I Slept with 100 Men in One Day, couldn't help but retch upon entering the condom-strewn bedroom. The anthropologist J.D. Unwin argued in his 1934...
So you might think, oh, this is such a weird scene. I would be completely grossed out if I were there. But I can tell you from having been on dozens of porn sets, within about 20 minutes of being on a porn set, it just seems perfectly natural, right? All your traditional morals about how this is awful and scandalous and bad for civilization, they just disappear. There's something about exposure just acts as an acid against our traditional moral reflexes. And there might be something that occasionally gets to you, but I've been on sets where a whole bunch of people were having sex, and most people on the set were eating pizza. They were just carrying on. They were talking about their kids. They were just talking the same way people talk in a coffee shop. So we easily get desensitized. Right? It's hard to build up moral sensitivity, which is why traditional religions usually want to keep you insular, because it's so easy to lose your moral and spiritual sensitivity. And an exposure to this, even this concept, is morally degrading, right? Even me talking about it would have a degrading effect on many people. And just being exposed to this, it it blunts and it diminishes and it acts as an acid against traditional moral reflexes.
Book Sex and Culture, that as a society becomes more developed, it tends to become more sexually repressed, turning sex into something highly taboo and semi-sacred, the means via which life in the image of God is perpetuated. This repression forces people to focus their sexual energies into objectives that are beneficial to the group, inspiring art, science, or religion. And the more the sexual taboo is loosened, the less creative the society will be, and the more the society can be said to be in decline. How far has Western culture descended that a young, reasonably intelligent woman is willing to do this and is effectively encouraged to do this by a culture so sexualized that ordinary people are prepared to appear fully nude on television in such programs as Naked Attraction? It has always been taboo to be a prostitute or to use prostitutes, possibly because it makes the resources sex exchange of male-female relations so blatant, and maybe because it desacralizes sex, turning it into a mere financial exchange.
So I used to be much more libertarian, particularly with regard to matters of sex. But then when I would talk to people in the pornography industry and ask them what they thought about the morality of what was going on, their number one answer was it's legal. Well, up until 1977, in effect, child porn was legal. So the number one answer that pornographers use for justifying the morality of what they do is, well, it's legal, and therefore, effectively, it's moral. And we don't allow child porn. But prior to 1977, when Congress passed highly restrictive child pornography laws, all the same sex shops where after 77 you would buy your pornography, they would also offer child pornography. And pornographers, right, the same people who were trafficking in adult pornography prior to 1977, they were quite happy to sell child pornography, right? There was a buck in it. There were live sex shows in Los Angeles and San Francisco, and then many of these live sex shows transitioned to all sorts of extreme behavior. And so the natural human tendency is to go downhill with your moral and spiritual standards, and this tendency keeps going downhill until there's a reaction. So think about the last time that a society was this sexually decadent was perhaps the Weimar Republic. And what happened after the Weimar Republic? There was a pretty strong blowback to the Weimar Republic.
So all the men filmed in the documentary wanted their faces blurred and their voices disguised. So why is this young woman, a millionaire as a consequence of the ersatz pimping website that is OnlyFans, prepared to so flagrantly break this taboo? Despite all her bluster, the intuitive wrongness of what she'd done hit even Phillips when she'd finished her orgy. She started crying.
Right. Comment in the chat. It was Bonnie Blue that wanted to go to 300, then 500. Lily Phillips is simply challenging her friend. How is this a story? So Lisa Sparks, who I knew, who I interviewed, she purportedly did it with over 900 men in one day. That's the record, and she forever regretted that. And I've been watching this Vince McMahon documentary series, 5-part series on Netflix, and you see the same tendencies to more and more extremism. And the only reason I'm live streaming today is I was reading a front page New York Times article on what happens when you watch 47 hours of the most popular videos on Rumble, and how much the most popular political creators on the platform Rumble are essentially captured by their audience. So I think this Lily Phillips challenge is in large part audience capture. People want spectacle. I've been live streaming since about 2016, and I have had some spectacle, some compelling interactions on this show, but they came at such a huge cost, I think, to the well-being of some of the people who participated. And so I now have 1% as much spectacle on the show as I did 6 years ago, because I simply could not stomach what I saw as the likely repercussions to people who were incredibly open and honest and vulnerable, and they would bare their soul on this show, but it just came at too big a price. So spectacle is compelling, right? A car crash is compelling. A train wreck is compelling, but car crashes are really bad for the people who participate in them. It is only the forced behavior morality on others that stops 10 million more porn stars. Right? This era rewards all this. Yes. Right. So it's hard to make a modern secular humanist enlightenment rationalist argument that what Lily Phillips did was morally wrong. Now, it's really easy from a religious perspective, and it's really easy if you have a strong traditional in-group identity. Right? If you are strongly identifying Italian American or Chinese American or Moravian American or Nigerian American, if you have any kind of relationship with your family and relatives and friends, you're not going to want to disappoint them and disgust them, and so you're not going to behave like this. You have to be somewhat disassociated from yourself and your true interests and from making your family and friends and community proud to be able to engage. Right? These porn stars, unlike any other period, are becoming the mainstream celebrities now. Well, we've had different cultures in history where female sex performers were revered. More pagan cultures would have temple prostitutes. So you used to go to a house of worship, and one of the big draws was that you get to have sex with the women of the temple. Now, I've been to many synagogues, and there have never been any temple prostitutes. I'm sure a lot more people would go to church, synagogue, and mosque today if you would get to bang the prostitutes of that particular house of worship. But this was fairly common in more pagan times. And with the decline of religion, we're reverting to more and more pagan tendencies.
She claimed not to have processed what she'd done yet, and she plaintively noted, "It's kind of like being a prostitute." The reaction to this upper-middle-class girl, she's from a wealthy Derbyshire family, her father, Lindsay, owns a cleaning business, and she attended the reasonably selective Sheffield University, where she studied nutrition, tells us a great deal about the tensions inherent in feminism and in the cult of youth, and the cognitive dissonance these tensions lead to. On the one hand, we are supposed to accept that men and women...
So the biggest story that I ever broke when I was writing on the porn industry was how one particular performer, Mark Wallace Goldberg, he was the most likely patient zero in an HIV outbreak in the heterosexual porn industry between, say, 1995 and 1998. And so over a dozen female porn stars who had unprotected backdoor sex with Mark ended up becoming HIV positive. And there was, an explosion of interest in this story when a whole string of people get HIV positive in the sex industry, in the porn industry. That captures attention. But for people with a more traditional sensibility, meaning people on the right, the loss of your soul, the loss of your innocence, the loss of your moral sensitivity, the loss of your sense of connection with your family, friends, community, the loss of your dignity, that is as big a deal, if not a bigger deal, than contracting an STD. So from a traditional perspective, we have a soul, that there's something that we possess that is beyond the material. Unless you believe that we have a soul, it's much harder on a purely rationalist basis to make the case that people like Lily Phillips in this mass gangbang are doing something wrong.
Men are psychologically equal, that we all have free will, and that this adult, a successful businesswoman, has made a conscious choice to do this, with the males paying for her service. On the other hand, we know this is nonsense, really, but can't quite say so because it's sexist or right-wing. Thus, Julie Bindel in The Spectator declared shame on the men exploiting Lily Phillips, pointing out that prostitutes usually suffer from mental health problems. Even she couldn't...
Mental health is thrown around as a term that has become quite amorphous. And the most useful definition, and I got this from the sociologist of medicine, Alan Horwitz, is to think of an analogy, a physical analogy. Does your wrist do everything that it needs to do? My wrist does everything it needs to do. So therefore, I don't have a wrist pathology. And with mental health, you're mentally ill when your mental reactions and your psychic reactions, don't do the things that you'd be expected to do as a normal person to survive in this world. So you're mentally ill if you are driven to engage in all sorts of behavior that is just going to cut you off from everyone who's precious to you, is going to isolate you. Because think, for millions and millions of years, if you were isolated from your family and tribe, that was pretty much a death sentence. Right? We did not evolve to live as individuals. We overwhelmingly evolved to live within a small tribe. And so mental illness is when you engage in behavior that cuts you off from your tribe, from your community, from your friends, and from the people most important to you. So my primary measurement for people is not the individual, it's the group. Because most of what we think comes from our group. All right, it's very rare that I talk to anyone who has a unique perspective on life. All right, almost always they're simply repeating points that they've heard from others. Most of my friends are on the right, so they frequently repeat things that they heard from Fox News or right-wing talk radio. So Jon Meacham wrote a terrific book in 2018, The Great Delusion, Liberal Dreams and International Realities. And I think that liberalism as a system of governance has some benefits, but it should not be the number one system that we use to understand our own lives and to regulate and organize society. And the main problem with liberalism is that it's profoundly individualist, and it is diluted in the sense that it holds that we as individuals in our own identity, that we can decide right and wrong. And so the typical liberal admonition for how you should lead your life is follow your bliss. Lily Phillips is following her bliss. The people who bang Lily Phillips are following their bliss. I was highly promiscuous for a time. I was following my bliss. And I wasn't having sex with married women, right? I wasn't having any kind of illegal sex. I was just having sex with, available women who were probably equally as damaged as I was, right? I was just following my bliss. Right-wing admonitions tend to boil down to do your duty. And so, Meacham notes, my view is we are profoundly social beings from the start to the finish of our lives, right? The individualist strategy usually does not work nearly as well as a group strategy. For most of our evolutionary history, being expelled from your family and tribe was a death sentence because we're evolved to need other people. Right? Individualism is of secondary importance compared to the group. Liberalism downplays the social nature of human beings to the point of almost ignoring it, instead treating people largely as atomistic actors. Atomistic, meaning atoms, meaning people who just decide right and wrong purpose. They develop a strategy for life on their own. And that's not how people operate. We almost always have a hero system that we take on from the people who are most important to us, our family and our community. So political liberalism, that is an ideology that is individualistic at its core. It assigns great importance to the concept of inalienable rights. I don't know how, from the perspective of liberalism, you make a strong case that Lily Phillips did something immoral. This concern for rights is the basis of its universalism. Everyone on the planet has the same inherent set of rights. And this is what motivates liberal states to pursue ambitious foreign policies to protect these rights and to extend these rights so that people in Afghanistan, they can have same-sex marriage too. Right? It's terrible foreign policy, and it's a terrible way of understanding how people work. I much prefer a nationalist, aka tribal, aka traditional understanding that we are part of something greater, that we are part of an extended family. So public and scholarly discourse about liberalism since World War II places enormous emphasis on what are called human rights. This is true all around the world. Human rights have come to define the most elevated aspirations of both social movements and political entities, state and interstate. They evoke hope and they provoke action. But there's something far more important than our rights, and that is our obligations. From any kind of right-wing traditional perspective on life, right, our obligations are at least as important, if not more important, than our rights. And so if you have that right-wing traditionalist perspective of do your duty, there's no way that you're A-OK with people like Lily Phillips and her OnlyFans performances.
Bring herself to fully expose the issues with the worldview that accepts that what Phillips has done is feminist and liberating. So it is time for us to do so. Being born in 2001, Phillips was essentially raised in a proto-woke society by millennials who were rebelling against the time-tested traditions of the war generation. She was placed on a maladaptive roadmap of life. Phillips, if she is representative of generation...
Right. So being raised with the ethos of follow your bliss, that's usually going to be maladaptive. Now, there will be some extraordinary successes from that ethos, but it should be subordinated to do your duty, and then within the context of your duty, then follow your bliss, so long as that does not undercut your duty. But he's right. This is right, to follow our bliss and to just do what feels good. That is not going to be a successful life strategy for any community and for most individuals.
Z was to a significant degree not directed to marry, have children, and fear and respect something eternal, but rather to believe that males and females are equal, that within certain proto-woke boundaries you can do whatever you...
It's easier to make a claim for some universal standard of morality if you hold that there is a God, that there is one God, one lawgiver, right, who has set one moral standard for how people should operate. Right, it's easy then to make a basis for morality. Look, there's an objective standard. God gave it here in the Ten Commandments. Right, that's a solid way that has served our ancestors for hundreds of years of developing some social norms, and it gives people more of a solid foundation for navigating the world. If the people that you're interacting with believe that there is an objective moral system, you feel like you can rely on them to behave in a more decent manner than those who deny the reality of some objective moral standard.
You want. Sexual promiscuity is normal and an expression of freedom, and traditional morality has been mocked, there being nothing beyond the material world. One chilling piece of evidence of this kind of upbringing is that her mother, Emma, is her financial manager, her pimp. However, on some level, Lynn will have absorbed elements of remnant traditional morality, including the idea that prostitution is wrong, it is objectifying yourself, it is blood money. Beyond these elements of the maladaptive roadmap, we have Phillips being raised in a child-centered culture, which questions the idea that your elders probably know best and that youngsters must be guided by them. In the 1990s, even though 18 marked official adulthood, there was no...
So the more traditional you go in Judaism and in some other tribal communities, the more likely it is that men will have beards. When a man has a beard, that he's not trying to capture eternal youth. This is not a society that venerates youth. Right? This is a community that venerates the wisdom that comes with age. So in a youth-obsessed culture, such as what we have in the West now, you have much more moral flexibility as opposed to a culture that venerates the wisdom that comes with age.
No internet and no OnlyFans until 2016, so the consequences of a young person's impetuous decisions that might mortify them later were heavily limited. People in their early 20s are, relative even to those 5 years older, less intelligent, less agreeable, less conscientious, and more mentally unstable. But this didn't used to matter so much. Magazines would reject their poorly written articles, publishers would ignore their derivative juvenilia novels, and there was little question, without impressing the gatekeepers, other than getting on television. Now, via the internet, they can become world infamous overnight, something...
So, if you have the dominant liberal ethos, the most important thing is to follow your bliss, to try to be happy, and the accompanying most important thing is to get along with other people. There's not a strong basis there for venerating your elders. Right? Venerating your elders comes from an ethos that is quite distinct from our dominant modern liberal ethos.
That may wreck the rest of their lives. What kind of man would want to have children with Phillips now, other than a thoroughly filthy fellow or someone so desperate that they'd overlook the realistic possibility of her adultery?
Right. I wouldn't feel good having a bride who'd had sex with all sorts of men in my own community, let alone someone who has done that for public consumption. Right? Most men are not wired that way. Men may like porn, but if a porn star stayed with you, you'd feel tempted to burn the sheets afterwards. There is a sense, even by the biggest, horn dog, that there is something contagious and disgusting about sex work, and you may take drugs, but you probably don't want to integrate your drug dealer into your life. Right? You may indulge in all sorts of vices, but you probably don't want to bring the people that you indulge in vice with to, Christmas dinner with your family.
So yes, Phillips's followers are exploiting someone young and silly, and worse.
Most parents are not going to be proud when their son becomes a horn dog. And most parents are particularly not going to be proud when their daughter becomes a prostitute. Very few families feel great pride in, oh, my daughter, the sex worker.
Worse than that, we as a society have created a situation in which people who, let's face it, aren't really grown-ups yet are treated as though they are fully intellectually mature. Worse still, due to their mollycoddled childhoods of naughty steps and strict no-bullying policies, they haven't been prepared to deal with the harshness of adult life, or prepared for the fact that terrible things can happen to them if they make poor decisions.
So liberalism does not work as a good life strategy, right? Compared to the traditional conceptions of do your duty. And Jon Meacham makes this point that we do not live as lone wolves, right? We are born into social groups. We're born into families and extended families. And our community, our extended family, shapes our identity well before we even have the possibility of asserting our individualism. And normal people develop strong attachments to their group. And normal people who love other people are willing to make great sacrifices for those that they love, and will make great sacrifices to avoid bringing shame to those that they love, right? We are tribal to our core. We are social to our core. The best, and why? Because that's the best way to survive, let alone thrive, is to be embedded among a community, a tribe, a society, a nation, and to cooperate with fellow members rather than to just act alone. So the easiest way to get a job is to be connected with other people who, once they find out that you need a job, that they refer you or they employ you. The easiest way to get married is to be strongly embedded in a community where people know you, like you, vouch for you, and want to connect you and hook you up. So reason gets a great deal of praise from secular people, in particular from liberals, but it's really the least important of the three ways that we determine our choices in life. All right, reason is far less important than our genetics, and it's way less important than our community and our socialization. We have long childhoods, right? So where you put the end of childhood, probably 12 to 15, maybe up to 18, right? We are traditionally protected and nurtured by our families and community, and we are intensely socialized. And it's only by about age 25 that we start to fully develop our critical faculties, where the prefrontal cortex comes fully into operation. So car rental companies overwhelmingly will not rent you a car until age 25. So by the time you're 25 and you start to be able to reason with great effectiveness, your genetics, your family, your community have already imposed an enormous value infusion on you. So we're also not born with a blank slate, all right? We're born with innate sentiments that strongly influence how we think and react to the world around us. We have limited choices in formulating our moral code because most of our thinking about right and wrong will come from the communities and the families that we grew up in. And so Lily Phillips is not primarily an individual who decided to bang 100 men in one day to attract attention, right? She is primarily a reflection of a particular community and family.
Phillips has been failed by a decadent society. But it gets worse. Not only is her youth relevant to this exploitation, but so is the fact that she clearly has psychological problems. You must have them in order to behave like this. What predicts being highly sociosexual? One factor is having a fundamentally low sense of self-esteem, such that you need people to find you sexually attractive and you need evidence of it. In this regard, she admits, I get like serotonin out of what she does, and that she really likes being recognized in the streets as that slut off the internet. However, In the documentary, she also makes the astonishing admission that she fears and feels guilty about not fully sexually pleasing her subscribers. This is a deeply neurotically insecure young woman. Hence, she dealt with the post-fornication-fest cognitive dissonance of realizing how immoral what she had done was by asserting that she now aimed to have sex with 1,000 men in 24 hours. The final reason why these men were exploited for Lily Phillips is perhaps the most to do of all. The patriarchy developed because males wanted sex, females wanted investment, so males wanted a guarantee against being cuckolded. This was patriarchy, male control of female sexuality.
Right. It's just a strong primal male fear of being cuckolded, that you're raising children who are not genetically your own and you don't even know it. So that's why men are much more concerned about and afraid of female promiscuity. Plenty of women are quite happy to settle down with a man who has been promiscuous. We're just wired differently. Women are far more vulnerable to STDs than men. Right? I know a lot of guys who've been highly promiscuous and never caught an STD. On the other hand, right, women who are highly promiscuous seem to catch STDs all the time.
If men needed to invest in their offspring for the offspring to survive ecological harshness, it would make sense for them to have sexually selected for females who were genuinely submissive to the patriarchy. Greek psychologist Menelaus Apostolou has argued in Sexual Selection Under Parental Choice that being adapted to patriarchy, females are adapted, to a greater extent than males, to a situation in which choices are made for them, usually by their parents.
That seems to work better for a lot of women, where they largely follow the rules. Right? Women are much more inclined to follow the rules. You see this in school particularly, that women tend to color within the lines. Men tend to be much more aggressive and assertive and much more willing to break laws. So women who are as wild as men, right, tend to live much riskier lives.
And particularly by their fathers. Left to their own devices, they are accordingly more likely to make maladaptive choices. In effect, feminism and the cult of youth places most women in a very pronounced evolutionary mismatch in which we would not only expect them to be extremely unhappy, but in which we would expect them to, in effect, make poor choices. They are much more strongly evolved than our males to be guided by their families and to be looked after by their families, by their husbands, and by the broader society. In the absence of this, they may go for the wrong kind of men and be exploited, or end up being highly sociosexual because the environment that would previously have controlled these impulses has collapsed. I have heard people condemn.
Female sexuality is much more shaped by communal opinion than male sexuality. So when women go to college, they often go through a lesbian phase because that's considered cool at the particular college that they attend.
Phillips as vile and her subscribers as creeps, but I would argue that she is a victim of a much more profound problem: feminism and the push towards equality, even between the immature and the mature. Women are in an extreme evolutionary mismatch. Young people are in an extreme evolutionary mismatch, and the result is the making of terrible decisions, epitomized in what Lillian Daisy Phillips did on the 19th of October, 2024. The Jolly Heretic is a reader.
So, do you think that she would have done this if she was part of a strongly identifying in-group? Right? I doubt it. When you're part of a strongly identifying in-group, you're primarily concerned about the opinions and the goodwill of the people who are around you. So she was part of a strongly identifying Greek in-group, or Russian in-group, or Lebanese in-group, or religious in-group. Right? She wouldn't behave this way if both of her parents were professors in sociology and she also wanted to become a sociologist. Then being a part of a strongly identifying professional in-group would make it highly unlikely that a person would want to behave this way. And it's a strong argument about the limits of political liberalism that it's so hard to make an argument that what she did is morally wrong from a liberal perspective. So liberalism believes in the buffered identity, where there's a clear distinction between your inner self and the external world. But my inner self is profoundly shaped by the world around me. I feel like a completely different person in a different setting. I feel completely different in San Francisco than I do in LA. I feel completely different in the country than I do in the city. I feel completely different in Yosemite than I do in Washington, D.C., than I do in Orlando, Florida, versus Sydney, Australia. When I go back to Australia, almost everything that bothers and obsesses me when I'm in LA just disappears, right? My concerns in Los Angeles are at about 5 to 10% of their intensity when I'm in Sydney, Australia, right? There's a traditional Jewish saying, change your place, change your luck. But change your place and you change your mindset. I feel completely different when I'm walking by the ocean as opposed to standing on top of a mountain, as opposed to being in an office building. I feel different when I'm walking down the street as opposed to when I'm lying down, as opposed to when I'm sitting at a table, when I'm by myself with other people. Right? I'm a completely different person. I'm a different person with each person that I bring into my life. I have a different conversation with different people. I may be having one type of conversation one-on-one with someone, then someone else comes along and that conversation shifts. So from the liberal perspective, right, the individual sense is buffered or protected from direct influence by external forces, such as spirits, gods, or social pressures. And that's maladaptive. You should be profoundly affected by the pressures of your family and the people who you love the most. If you hate your family and want nothing to do with them, and you've developed your own substitute family, that's one thing. But any normal, healthy person has people that they love and want to be loved in turn, and want to have someone that you can call if you need an emergency ride to the hospital or you're in great pain. So sometimes there are things that come up in the lives of all of us that we are not sufficient to figure out how to navigate it, right? We think more clearly, more effectively, and more accurately when we think socially, when we think out loud and talk things through with other people. So with the growing secularization of society, that boundary between the self and the outside world has become more buffered. So in pre-modern times, people were considered to have porous selves, open to outside forces, whether of the cosmos, of spirits, or of God. And if you're on the right, the more likely you are to have more of a medieval and porous sense of self. So the liberal, modern, enlightenment, rationalist view is that we are self-contained, that we see a clear boundary separating our inner psychological life from external influences. But I don't know about you, but my inner psychological life is profoundly shaped by the people around me. I remember when I first started going to 12-step programs for sex addiction, the very nature of my sexual fantasies calmed down and became less nasty and less cruel just from attending a couple of 12-step meetings for sex addiction. That community started shaping even my sexual fantasies. So buffered identity goes hand in hand with this view of the liberal value of autonomy, right? If you have a buffered identity, it means that you are capable of self-governance, right? Lily Phillips believes that she is capable of self-governance. She believes that she is capable of making decisions based on her own thinking rather than having to follow community or spirituality or God. Autonomy is central to a liberal enlightenment rationalist view of the world. And it goes hand in hand with the disenchantment of the world, where you just view the world purely in terms of natural causes rather than supernatural causes. And with the buffered perspective, there's a tremendous emphasis on the development of an inner psychological life. And just imagine that Lily Phillips believes she can develop her inner psychological life no matter how many men she's had sex with that day, and all that sex is not going to affect her inner psychological life. I mean, think about that. You have sex with over 100 men in a day, and if you truly believe in the buffered identity, that's not going to shape your inner psychological life. I think that is a bizarre rejection of the way people work. So the liberal, secular humanist, post-enlightenment perspective is that every individual is just entitled to his own beliefs, his own expressions, his own lifestyle without undue interference. So what is it in that liberal worldview then that would make the argument that Lily Phillips did something wrong? Right? If you empathize with other people, it's really hard to have a buffered identity, right? Sometimes it's painful for me to watch a TV show or a movie or to read a novel because I have so much empathy for the characters that I'm feeling pain when the characters are going through pain, let alone when people I care about are going through pain. Of course, that's going to tear me up inside. So buffered identity creates a more individualized, atomized society where ties to family, friends, and community are weaker, where personal freedom is paramount and everyone does what they think is right in their own minds. And it creates a mess, such as what we've seen with Lily Phillips and all the people who want to emulate her.
So that's
This is
the
Marc
daybook.
Andreessen.
All right. So first thing I want to discuss is something that occurred to me this morning, and this is either a genius insight or who cares. I'm thinking a lot, as I always do, about the asymmetrical advantages between the parties and the sides, and the transition. We've talked about this before. Peggy Noonan has a great comment about it today. Like, there's never been a transition like this. Biden is so receded. He's either invisible or having problems for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part. And Trump and Team Trump are so active on immigration, on foreign policy. I mean, you have the borders are like going around the country, like starting the government. It's so interesting. And it reflects a lot of mojo on the part of Team Trump. One area that you saw during the campaign, and you're seeing now, and I assume you're going to see next year, is this category of people. Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon are two examples. Take Charlie Kirk. He hosts a daily show, a video podcast. He was involved in voter registration.
And chat says, I wouldn't call Lily Phillips a victim. So it all depends on your hero system. But you know that if she was part of a different family or a different community, she would not have acted this way. Right? If she was raised to value her relationships within her community, right, there's no way that she would act this way. You have to be disconnected from other people to take this on as a possibility. So change her circumstances, change her situations, and she would never behave this way. So you can then recognize that, yeah, from one perspective, when you recognize the power of situation, when you recognize the power of family, when you recognize the power that other people have over us, then you can see that in a different situation, this would never have occurred to her.
Registration efforts that were derided, but it seems to have turned out to do quite well. He's both in regular touch with Republicans on the Hill and Team Trump, but he operates independent. So he can do stuff that they wouldn't do or couldn't do. He's like this entrepreneurial activist, promoter, lots of different things. So Mike, I think that's a in the modern era, that's a huge role. So my question for you, Dan, is does your party have people like that, or is this an asymmetrical advantage that's got to?
Why is this drone story over New Jersey? It's such a huge story on Fox. It's just dominating Fox, and it's dominating the right. And so why is this drone story so attractive to people who don't buy what experts tell them? Because experts tell you that these drone sightings are no big deal. Right? It's people who don't believe the experts, who are skeptical, who are populist, who are nationalist, who are probably right of center, who are much more likely to view these purported drone sightings over New Jersey as a big deal. Right? If you believe the Pentagon is telling us the truth, if you believe the government experts are telling us the truth, then you don't think that these sightings matter.
To be solved for.
It's an asymmetrical advantage today in that, 15, 20 years ago, the Democrats were the pioneers of outside groups, the collectively organizing soft money, funneling it through making long-term investments in infrastructure gains. And it really, played out when Barack Obama ran. A lot of those pieces had been put in place over the preceding decade. Look, if Trump lost, Charlie Kirk would be kind of moved aside, right? I mean, the people were really questioning, like, did this work? Now, it did. So his prominence has grown. But I think the Democratic Party, what it doesn't have is the investments that they have made have been in stuff like ground game with.
Just looking at the chat, Glib Medley says, well, her mother is her manager, so the family bonds that Lily Phillips has are strong. So I'm thinking about the profound change in relationships between parents and adult children in my lifetime. So since the 1970s, particularly in Anglo society, I noticed a much higher percentage of parents want to be friends with their adult children. And so many of my peers as adults happily live with their parents and they interact as friends. And I don't think that's just clearly a bad thing. I think there are many wonderful things about that. And I think for most people, that's probably a good type of relationship. Once you become an adult, it would be best to have what is primarily a friendly relationship with your parents. But even though I think overall this is probably a good thing, it does come with a downside in that your friends are not going to appreciate your negative moral judgments about their choices. And so a parent who primarily wants a friendly relationship with his adult children is not going to be able to make the same kind of moral judgments on the kid that you would when you have the traditional parent-child relationship. So in traditional community, parents and their adult children are not primarily friends. Right? There is still a more hierarchical relationship. So the more traditional you go in life, usually the more hierarchical relationships are. So the more traditional you go in Judaism, the more hierarchical the community will operate. You'll be less likely to treat your rabbi as your friend. So in Reform and Conservative Judaism and Modern Orthodoxy, it will be, I'm Rav Levi or I'm Rabbi Joe. But in a traditional Orthodox community, you wouldn't call your rabbi by his first name, and you wouldn't have primarily a friendly relationship with him. You would have much more hierarchical relationship with him. And so you are much less likely to be chummy and friendly with a great rabbi in traditional Orthodox Judaism than you are in less traditional Orthodox Judaism. So you also then wouldn't freely share your opinions on this week's Parsha, this week's Torah portion. So in Reform and Conservative Judaism, it's very common for you to have a circle where everyone gets to share their opinion on the weekly Parashah, the weekly Torah portion. But you don't have this in a traditional community because there's much less of an egalitarian spirit, and there's much less of a sense that everybody's opinion on the Parsha is worthy of respect.
With Latino research and stuff like that, now they need to invest in things like the podcast networks and personalities.
Dan, let me stop you. You say they need to invest in.
Yep.
I think part of the power of Steve Bannon's empire, and again, it's not just a media empire, it's multifaceted activist, is no one quote unquote invested in it. The RNC didn't say, hey, get that Charlie Kirk guy on the phone, let's build something. This is being built organically by entrepreneurs about ideas and activism. So when you say they have to build it, I don't know.
That's not entirely true.
All right, remote work. I do have a strong opinion on remote work. I think remote work works better for some people and doesn't work as well for others. So particularly the more immersed you are in your family, particularly if you're a female, then remote work will come with a great advantage. I don't think people who are working remotely are inherently less productive. I don't think there's anything inherently bad or inherently good about remote work. It depends on the situation. So I get energy from other people, right? I prefer to be interacting in person with other people as opposed to working remotely. Let's get, though, an opinion here from Peter Thiel.
Maybe we're in a very different moment from 5 years ago, pre-COVID. I think the statistic is something like 94% of the federal government workers are working from home. And what people learned in Silicon Valley, where you had remote work for 1 or 2 years, was remote work was not working. When people
I don't believe that's true. It doesn't work for some people. It does work for other people.
Didn't come into the office, they weren't working. And initially it was a sign of how powerful the workers were. They could insist on not working. And then after 2 years, the companies just fired a bunch of these people.
Also, it was part of an overall package, right? Everything is a package. So many people would give up $10, $20, $50,000 a year in salary to avoid a hellish commute.
And reasserted control, because you realize, wow, there are all these people we hired and they're not working and it doesn't matter and we can just get rid of them. And isn't that the lesson that we should draw from these?
I find it interesting that overwhelmingly it seems like that the primary voices against remote work tend to be on the right, while people left of center tend to have a lot more sympathy or open minds with regard to remote work. There's a mirror to something in the Alexander Technique community. So if you suggested teaching Alexander Technique lessons via Skype 15 years ago, you were regarded as a terrible person by senior members in the Alexander Technique community. They were outraged. I mean, there was just so much disgust and venom directed by people who would dare teach the sacred Alexander Technique remotely. Then COVID came along. All Alexander teachers had to start teaching remotely. And I wonder, did those traditional Alexander Technique teachers who had trashed the more progressive teachers who'd been teaching online for years, did they ever make apologies for the horrible things that they'd said about their fellow, usually younger Alexander teachers who dared to teach remotely when they had to teach remotely during COVID?
4 or 5 years of the government workers not working, that, not that they have to necessarily come back to the office, but maybe we don't need them altogether.
Okay, what the heck?
I mean, there is outside money that looks to make investments in people and other things that are willing to take losses to grow audience, to build up. I mean, Sean and I were going back and forth this morning on text about some of the investments.
So I admit in the remote work category, I'm probably a little bit left of center in that I think it works just fine, if not better, for many workers. I just think it should be part of a negotiation between an employee and an employer, and I don't think there's anything inherent about any one particular situation. And I see John Kirby, national security spokesman for the Biden administration, saying that there's not enough evidence to start shooting down these purported drones over New Jersey. And I tend to side with John Kirby. Right? I'm going to take the official expert Pentagon line. I suspect that these drones are not a significant threat not a threat to American security. So sometimes I side with the populace. Sometimes I side with the anti-expert crowd, and then sometimes I side with expertise.
Investigatory outfits around the country that go after one party or the other. They're funded by outside groups. The Democrats have about $1 billion that meets annually and makes investments in different entities. They just.
But why haven't? I want to get Sean in.
Well, yeah, I mean that's it.
But $1 billion. Where's their Charlie Kirk?
Well, look. I again, 3 months ago when we were on here, we were all saying, "Is this going to be successful?"
No, but forget the voter registration piece. That's a piece, and
yeah, but everything. But it's all.
Right, here's another perspective on Lily Phillips. What OnlyFans Billions reveals about the market value of male desire. In the wake of OnlyFans' staggering 2023 financial revelation, $6.6 billion in user spending, predictable storm of male outrage has erupted across social media. Beneath the surface discourse about shameless wealth and moral decay lies a far more complex psychological and economic revolution that's reshaping the fundamental power dynamics of desire. Remember, if you're right of center, you are skeptical of a life philosophy around follow your bliss. And if you're left of center, you're probably down with follow your bliss. So the $5.3 billion paid to creators of OnlyFans outstrips the combined salaries of the NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball. All right, it generates more revenue than Spotify. OnlyFans creators are out earning Netflix stars, the growth rate outpacing both Instagram and TikTok. So OnlyFans has perfected the monetization of being seen. It's proved that personalized intimacy, even in its most manufactured form, is now more valuable than almost any other form of entertainment we produce. So OnlyFans has become a lens through which to examine every major fault line in contemporary society. It tells us something profound. about our culture. Men have become both the engine and the exhaust of a system that systematically strips them of what they believed was their intrinsic sexual power. Their gaze, once a weapon of social control, has been commodified into just another metric on a dashboard alongside click-through rates and conversion percentages. Okay. So I would wager that people who spend money on OnlyFans are not particularly happy people. They're not usually thriving socially in life, right? The higher the quality of your relations with your family, or with your friends, with your community, or with your God, right, the less likely you are to spend money on OnlyFans.
Part of it, right?
But how about name the Democrat who has got a daily megaphone with a big audience, like Charlie Kirk does and Steve Bannon do, and there are others.
The New York Times.
Well, exactly.
I mean,
but that's
it.
different.
Like we had MSNBC and all these
but here's
outfits.
the difference. But here's the difference. The New York Times isn't on the phone to Capitol Hill and to the Biden White House strategizing to say, "Hey, let's get Joni Ernst in line." They're not.
No.
I mean, yeah, I see your smile, but it's not the
right.
same thing. It's not the same thing. So what's the
Right, Marc Andreessen, inventor of the Netscape browser, gave an interview to the Free Press.
And they're in retrospect now that they're like, the next time something like that happens, God forbid, there ought to be a nationwide drone response system that's able to put an armed response, an armed AI automated response under human control, but like within seconds. I'll give you an example. So my partner Ben has funded a pilot program in Las Vegas. The Las Vegas PD now has the ability to put an unarmed drone with a high-resolution camera on site at any 911 at the location of any 911 call, any burglary alarm, or any gunshot. In Las Vegas, they're able to put a drone on site in 90 seconds.
Wow.
Right, and that has two consequences. Number one, if something goes wrong, if there's a break-in or whatever, there's something happening, a carjacking or whatever. Number one, you're gonna have instant response. You're gonna be able to see it. By the way, the drone can then follow the perpetrator, right? So the guy drives away, the drone follows, right? So you can't get away from these things. And then that means that the police officers are not at danger when they go in blind because they don't know what's happening, right? And when police encounters go bad and somebody gets shot and killed, a lot of it is because you have a live police officer under stress in a situation that's unclear where they don't know what they're going into and something goes wrong. So if you have the drone in there, even if the drone doesn't have a weapon on it, you have the visibility such that the police officer will know what to do when they get there, and there's much higher likelihood of things going better and lives being saved. That's one, but two, the deterrent effect, right? If you know that in Las Vegas, if you shoot somebody, you're going to get caught by a drone, like you're right, or break into a 7-Eleven at 2 a.m, you're not going to do it, right? And so these are just like examples right now of the kind of technologies that could be deployed. And again, these are like I'm talking about unarmed drones, but just like eyes on, massive deterrent to crime. And so there's like examples of that basically all the way across all these systems, all the way across the military, all the way across law enforcement, civil services, fire, emergency response, all basically just like across the board. There's all these things that you can do.
I think this is great. All right. I think this would be a significant deterrent for crime. And amid all the talk from our elite media, how crime hasn't been going up the last few years, the statistics show it's going down. With the natural progression of technology, both in life-saving medical technology and in other technology that aids law enforcement, crime should be significantly dropping each year. So when it stays even, right, that's terrible, because all sorts of injuries that used to kill people 20 years ago, 50 years ago, you'll now survive with modern technology if you just get to a hospital in time. So with the inevitable development of technology, our crime rate should be significantly decreasing each year. So it's not enough that our crime rates stay even, right? They should be dropping by at least 2% a year, or there's something terrible going on. Right. I was motivated to live stream today because I was thinking of Lily Phillips as an example of audience capture. She is producing scandalous content to make more money, and she's giving people what the audience wants. And I remember when I was live streaming in 2018, I very quickly discovered what people want, that the more extreme the content, the bigger the spectacle you're able to put on, the more shocking the revelations of what someone would say on a stream, the more you would compel people's attention and the bigger audience you could build. And then just thinking about how there is a natural trend in human nature to chase excitement. And once you're able to blow up traditional moral norms, that there is a natural human tendency to descend lower and lower until there is a strong reaction. And part of this thinking was from the New York Times. We have Stuart Thompson's monitored right-wing media for the New York Times since 2020. He watched 47 hours of video on Rumble for this article. I traded my news apps for Rumble, the right-wing YouTube. Here is what I saw. I don't watch that much Rumble. I don't have many favorite commentators on there. Occasionally, I want to see what Steve Bannon's War Room has to say, and occasionally I want to see what Dan Bongino has to say. But generally, I don't find it's in my best interests. It's not good for my mental and social health to be listening to them every day. As soon as President-elect Donald J. Trump won the presidential race, influencers on Rumble, the right-wing alternative to YouTube, flooded the platform with a simple catchphrase, "We are the media now." That's a vast exaggeration. Social media has become more prominent, but traditional media still has tremendous influence, and there is considerable value in both traditional media and in independent creators. So it depends what you want. Sometimes an independent creator will give you a more concise information about the truth than traditional media. Sometimes traditional media will do things that individual creators cannot do. So this idea has captured a growing sense that traditional journalists have lost their position at the center of the media ecosystem. Polls show that trust in mainstream news media has plummeted. Well, it's primarily plummeted by people right of center, and for good reason, in that in the traditional media, almost nobody shares the values of the ordinary American. So elites overwhelmingly believe in far more censorship and far more restrictions on what you can say on social media than do ordinary Americans. And elites believe much more in elite power and elite rule rather than in traditional American understandings that we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So in its place, they argue, are right-wing digital creators who have found hordes of fans online. Rumble is tiny compared to YouTube, but it is a primary source of news for millions of Americans. I don't think that's good. Right? There may be consistently wonderful shows on Rumble, but overall, I have probably a pretty negative view of right-wing live streamers and podcasts. Most of them, I don't think, are good for you, are not profound, and most of them are just playing into a sense of victimhood. So on election night, Rumble's active viewership topped out at more than 2 million. If Rumble was the media now, I wondered what it would be like to consume an all-Rumble diet. So with Rumble, as with OnlyFans, there is a strong financial incentive and success incentive and natural human desire to be seen incentive to create a spectacle and to tell people what they want to hear. And what people love to hear is that they are victims of nefarious elites, and the creator of the live streamer is fighting for them against the elite. So November 18, 2 weeks after the election, I deleted my news apps, unsubscribed from all my podcasts, filtered all my newsletters to the trash. And for the next week, from early morning until late at night, I got all my news from Rumble. It sounds like that bloke who ate nothing but McDonald's for a month. So I started by visiting Rumble's homepage, where I saw my first recommended video. It was about the risk of nuclear war, with an AI-generated photo of President Biden laughing maniacally above a headline that read, "World War III incoming. Biden authorizes strike on Russia ahead of Trump taking office." Right. It doesn't speak well of Rumble that it promotes this type of content, and it's not good for you to consume this type of content. You'd be far better off listening to the Great Courses series. Rumble was once an obscure video platform, but after January 6, 2021, conservatives have flocked to it. It's quickly embraced its new role as free speech haven. I am tremendously grateful for Rumble, for Odyssey, for BitChute, for free speech platforms. So I'm grateful for being able to say what I want to say on Rumble and not have to deal with YouTube's terms of service. His content today goes far beyond cat videos. Video game live streams populate its homepage along a bizarre face-slapping competition called Power Slap. I think Power Slap is terrible. It's a competition where you just get to slap the other person in the face. Right? The damage that comes from that must be significant. Right? I don't think that is a healthy form of entertainment or sport. I love boxing. I'll admit I love boxing. But boxing is a little more sophisticated than just allowing someone to smash you in the face. Now, back to the New York Times author. He says, after Donald Trump swept to victory on November 5, I expected many of the videos to feel triumphant, and there were a few moments of joy, such as when the hosts of Morning Joe said that they went to visit Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and you had clips of NFL athletes doing Mr. Trump's dance moves, and Donald Trump recapturing popular culture from the clutches of Hollywood liberals. But happiness quickly gave way to a relentless outpouring of anger and frustration. That's what I found when I was listening to a lot of right-wing talk radio back in the 1990s, that the more right-wing talk radio I listened to, the more unhappy and angry I became. The more Dennis Prager I listened to on the radio, the more unhappy and angry I became, and the more frustrated. So I think he's onto something here. But their happiness quickly gave way to a relentless outpouring of anger and frustration as they fixated on a cast of perceived enemies to blame for America's troubles, from Democratic politicians to TikTok personalities to Republican adversaries. So this is a formula for success, right? Appealing to people's anger, but it's not a good formula for happiness. So this is from the New York Times. On the other hand, you listen to the Mark Halperin show, you don't consistently come away from it feeling increased levels of anger and frustration.
Closest in the Democratic Party to somebody with a media megaphone, activist chops, communication. But again, it's also this independence piece, which is so key.
Mark Halperin is a great host, but he interrupts people way too much.
Because Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon, sometimes they do stuff without checking. Sometimes they do stuff that the Trump people don't even like.
Sure, yes. Look, we had it with MoveOn.org and all of those entities.
Still not the same. I'll tell you, you had it. First of all, you don't have it now. Second of all,
I agree.
Move On did not have a daily show, right? They didn't have that level of
when they were
influence.
powerful 20 years ago, this stuff didn't exist, right? We need to modernize. I mean, that's the problem. A lot of our investments are dated and stale. And the world has evolved and Republicans jumped in front of us.
Sean, I want to hear you at length on this, but two things. One is Tony Blinken is in Baghdad as part of his post-Assad.
So is the Lily Phillips gangbang phenomenon, do you think that's an example of audience capture where creators are just primarily asking, what does my audience want to see? And then if so, you see this coarsening trend throughout popular culture. And then do you see any similarity between what's going on with Rumble's most successful live streamers and creators appealing to the audience desire to feel enraged and victimized and frustrated, right? If you can enrage, you engage, right? The more intense the emotions you elicit from an audience, the more likely you are to be successful. On the other hand, right, eliciting certain emotions is not good for people.
Tour of trying to figure out what to do. I blew by your Medal of Honor. Could you revisit that a little bit? I know it appears that hosting this program is effortless, but sometimes I get
on the RNC and on the team just as much as the outside groups as they don't. Let me just start with this. Back in '96, I managed my first campaign.
Right. About this, but just if you would start by confirming my sense, which is this is an underexplored area, and the Democrats really don't have anything close to this.
Yeah, the one thing that makes Bannon, but definitely.
I don't care if this is formula entertainment. I can't wait to watch Carry On. It's a movie on Netflix. And apparently it's just a paint-by-numbers production, but it's about a TSA agent going up against a terrorist. And I love airport and airplane dramas, right? I love disaster films like The Day After Tomorrow, and I love this whole setup here. Crowded airport, a dangerous suitcase, a mysterious criminal mastermind. On Christmas Eve, a security officer faces the ultimate travel nightmare. Right? I love that pitch. Thinking about the TSA officer who saw the mastermind of 9/11 and was just chilled to his soul, but because he didn't want to be racist and he didn't want to racially or criminally, or religiously, ethnically profile, he let the hijacker on the plane, right? If the TSA officers hadn't been so afraid of the negative effects of being caught racially, religiously profiling Muslims, we would not have had 9/11.
Definitely Charlie. And well, let me just start with this. Back in '96, I managed my first campaign. I remember we had union support, the Republican that I was running, and it was like you picked up the phone, you're like, we need 50 guys at this corner to do. I mean, it was unreal. That's what Charlie has in the modern era now, which is I need 500 young guys to do this. But the difference that Charlie has, Bannon has a massive megaphone, but Charlie has the organizational piece. And number one, you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember not Charlie, but more like Steve. These guys don't always with you. They'll beat up on.
So have you seen the Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix or read the biography of Vince McMahon? Vince McMahon is probably Donald Trump's best friend. And I've never paid much attention to professional wrestling, but really helps you understand Donald Trump and his appeal and his persona to have a feel for professional wrestling. And Vince McMahon, right, the head of this professional wrestling association, he got his son and his daughter into the business. His father was in the business. He got his wife into the business, Linda McMahon, who is Donald Trump's education secretary. And I see the same sort of trends towards audience capture and creating more and more spectacle, and anything to elicit an intense emotional reaction from the audience is a moneymaker, right? You see these same trends throughout popular culture, including professional wrestling, including in Donald Trump's brand of politics, and in Lily Phillips' brand of OnlyFans.
Are you being a character?
It was after I graduated college.
Just relax, no pressure, everything will be good.
You gonna take it easy on me?
Oh, without a doubt.
A decision was made in a very short period of time to give it a try and see how it went.
When Steph started to work with us, it escalated incredibly fast. There was a storyline where Steph was getting married to a talent named Test. But the writers, they didn't know what the payoff was. There was never an ending to the story. So I come up with an idea and present it to Vince. You should take a look at this. What if I was at her bachelorette party and I Mickey'd her drink? And then I end up getting married to her like at one of those drive-through things in Vegas. He's like, man, I love that.
Oh my God! And his line is, and Vince, it's not a question of if, but how many times
did we consummate the marriage?
Oh God, I cannot believe that.
The first time we go back on TV after this whole angle happened, the crowd turns on her.
Right, so that's going to get a very strong emotional reaction from the audience, and this is something he's doing to his own kids. The Duke lacrosse accuser has come forward and admitted that she just made the whole thing up. And Stephen Miller was someone who fought against this false narrative where overwhelmingly the news media and the Duke University elites were against the lacrosse team, taking the word of this stripper.
Today, after all these years, the former stripper who accused 3 Duke lacrosse players of rape almost 2 decades ago, triggering a legal saga that gripped the nation, now admitting in an interview she made the whole thing up. It's too late for Crystal Magnum to pay the price for lying under oath or to undo the damage that she did to these 3 young lives. All of these men were cleared. but she says that she doesn't have any regrets. Former NFL sideline reporter Michelle Tafoya standing by, but first to senior correspondent Steve Harrigan reporting live from Atlanta. Hi.
So I have a hypothesis that the more you need other people for survival, so the more intense your in-group identity, right, the less likely you are to get engaged in this kind of callous behavior as this stripper.
Martha, it took 18 years for this one-time North Carolina stripper to admit the incident never happened, and also that she was sorry for what she had caused. She spoke from inside a prison where she is currently serving a 14-year sentence for murdering her one-time boyfriend. She said the rape by 3 Duke lacrosse players never happened, and she's sorry.
I testified falsely against them by saying that they raped me when they didn't, and that was wrong.
Right. I suspect that she's saying this to get some kind of advantage, such as to get parole.
And I betrayed the trust of a lot of others.
So the more intelligent you are, the more capacity you have for empathy. And one definition of moral decency is empathy. So empathy requires abstract thought. IQ is a pretty good estimator of your capacity for abstract thought. So not everyone with a high IQ is empathic, but people on average with a high IQ are more likely to feel empathy. They are more likely, they have more ability to enter into this abstract thought than people with a lower IQ. So I don't think this woman is a rocket scientist.
Other people who believed in me.
This case got national attention, really explosive headlines. You had 3 white students at an elite university accused of racially motivated sexual assault. They were really prejudged by many to be guilty in the media, in their own university, and even by the prosecution. The prosecutor went so far as to get disbarred for withholding DNA evidence. Even the president of Duke suspended the 3 students, canceled the lacrosse season. He later said, "We got it wrong." After the case was dismissed, the 3 students settled out of court with Duke for an undisclosed sum. Martha, back to you.
Steve Harrigan, thank you very much. Let's bring in former NFL sideline reporter Michelle Tafoya, host of the Michelle Tafoya Show podcast. Michelle, we all remember this case very well. You know, these young men went through a very difficult time when no one believed them. And Mike Nifong went right on TV, the prosecutor here, and basically said, you know, this is white privilege. These young men are bad people, and clearly they raped this woman. He was disbarred because of it, as Steve Harrigan reported.
It was a huge story, and it went so far beyond just sports. You talked about, and Steve talked about, all the layers to this story. I keep coming back to this one phrase. I was in an airport recently and saw a woman wearing a T-shirt that said, "Believe all women." And we know we can't. And it's because of women like Crystal Mangum. And it's many, many others. There are stories all over the sports landscape of players, Ohio State, Sacred Heart, a young high school player out in Southern California who spent 6 years in prison after being falsely accused of rape. Their lives are forever changed. Now, naturally, these players get targeted. In this case, I think at Duke, because
Dennis Prager had a profound insight that the rape of a name is sometimes just as bad, if not worse, than the rape of a body. And what these Duke lacrosse players endured was the rape of their good name.
they were white, because it was an elite university, and probably she thought she might be able to get some money, certainly attention out of this. As you detailed, Mike Nifong thought he could get reelected out of this. But the trajectory of all 3 of those young men's lives, not to mention the coach, Mike Pressler, who had to leave the program, went on to a smaller school, ended up having a successful lacrosse coaching career, but not at Duke, at a really small college in Rhode Island. So there were many people affected by this, and their lives forever changed.
Yeah, and Duke University, jumped into the fray right off the bat. And rather than say, let's let justice take its course, let's let the facts come out, they took DNA samples from the entire team. And she did not identify anyone on the team, and none of the DNA samples matched anyone on the team. I'm I'm fairly sure I'm remembering that correctly. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. But, you know, Michelle, just a travesty, really. So many lives
It is.
impacted.
And as you said, these three.
Okay, so check out the Netflix documentary series. It's called Mr. McMahon. It'll give you a better understanding of Donald Trump and our current cultural moment, particularly if you don't know anything about professional wrestling, which is a big deal to millions of Americans.
And they're chanting slut.
Right, Vince McMahon is happy that tens of thousands of people here are chanting slut at his daughter because it means that they have a strong emotional reaction and therefore they're more likely to become customers, which is pretty similar business model to Lily Phillips, right? She is provoking a strong emotional reaction with her fans, getting them to pay money, and her mother is happy to monetize this. Lily Phillips has 9 employees, and her mom is overseeing the business.
And Vince, as they're going crazy for her, he looks at me and he goes, meaning like this is money.
Man, I've got a big smile on my face because that means the audience is participating. Anytime the audience is participating, they're loving what it is you're doing. So Steph became this great heel. You know, I mean, she was willing.
Yeah, there'd be a huge audience to watch Vince McMahon have sex with his daughter, right? That would get an enormous emotional reaction from people. And so, you know, his daughter is, you know, down to her underwear in some of these public performances.
Willing to do anything. You know, she's always been, you know, whatever it is you want, Dad. You know, she knew what I was trying to do.
If anybody knows anything about screwing, it's you.
When I was younger in my career, I was just all on board to do whatever he wanted. I told.
So I notice again and again and again that boys tend to have really close relations with their mother, right? They tend to love their mother, and girls, daughters, just tend to really love their father. This, in a normal, healthy family, I just notice kids have such intense relations with their opposite sex parent. All right, let's get Kip back onto the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, man, not too much. Figured I'd check in with you. Are you having a good TGIF today?
I am. It's good to hear from you.
And not a. It's Friday the 13th. Nothing weird going on out in Hollywood, is there?
Not as far as I know. I don't believe in any mystical significance to 13.
Well, I just noticed it on my phone today that it was Friday the 13th. They made a movie about it back in the 70s. They made a big deal about it back in the day. That clip you showed on Kellyanne Conway yesterday,
yeah.
I'm so impressed by her. She is, usually Trump has these knockout gorgeous women. So we should have expected, because she's a lot more average looking, we probably should expect that she's packing a little bit more punch in the brain department. And she sure is. It almost seems to me like every one of her words has been tested out by a focus group, and it has like the most impact humanly possible. Do you get that sense when you're hearing her give a dose of truth to somebody?
Yeah, that's why I played that excerpt. I thought it was very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she just strikes me as not necessarily an economical use of words, but she uses the most impactful words, and we could all just I don't know, listen to her talk every once in a while just to realize, okay, this is how the best of the best does it. You know, when it comes to Trump, it's something more magical and charismatic with him. You know, with her, she's going right to the point to where just from a wordsmith category, I don't know of anybody that does it better than she does as far as getting your point across. Or anyway, I feel can you think of anybody else that gets their point across so well and picks such perfect words?
I can't think of anyone better.
Mm-hmm. Me neither. I was looking at a poll here of let's see what the poll was. It was the institutions Americans trust most and least, And I noticed that Congress was down to 8%. It seems pretty low, doesn't it?
But most people like their congressman. So they don't like the institution, but they like their congressman.
Huh. That seems weird, doesn't it? That you have that much dislike, but like you say, they like the guy in their district. The other house that I have is in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. I'm wondering, do you think she'll get anything, any fancy job, any kind of post from Trump?
No, they number one, just pragmatically, they can't afford to lose any more House members. They've only got a 217 to 215 advantage, so it's just razor thin. But she is an important person in the Trump story, right? She does channel a significant part of Trump's support. I think she when I see her, I mean, good or bad, she's genuine, you know. Mm-hmm. And when he thinks about all the people that screwed him over, that jumped ship from him, I'm sure he thinks about a Marjorie Taylor Greene and says, man, even with their faults, that lady would be true blue to the ninth inning. You know, there would be no problems there with loyalty. And you agree with that, don't you? Yes.
Looking at this list of least appreciated, I guess, among the public, big business at 14%, television news at 14% approval, criminal justice system at 17%, and newspapers at 18%. That's pretty low. Organized labor at 25%. Would that be the unions, Luke?
Yes.
Okay. And then it goes up from there, but that's some pretty low numbers. So on one level, you would think that if Trump could just start the improvements, that would be something. Maybe that would be enough. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to change because hang on. I don't think it has anything to do, these low approval ratings. I don't think it has anything significantly to do with the actual performance of these institutions. I believe that those low approval ratings are overwhelmingly the result of the fire hose of information that we now have available to us as opposed to pre-internet days. So the more you find out about people, or the easier it is to find out about people and institutions, the more you can find out horrible things. And so I think these low approval ratings are not primarily about these institutions. These low ratings are primarily about our moment, our situation, because this is these trends are throughout the world. That as people learn more about institutions and public figures, that their approval goes down and down and down. I mean, if you knew more about the people that you have the most veneration for, right, your approval of them would likely decrease.
Right. Well, same as I told you, it would be hard to have heroes now, even sports heroes now, because you can see them, you know, assaulting their wives or doing whatever they do in real time. You know, there's no way to cover that up because everybody's got a camera attached to their phone now.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say on this Lily Phillips, you know, makes you think about if you had her as a girlfriend, you know, you said you dated some of these porn ladies, they're dead inside. So even though maybe you think you're walking around with a trophy or whatever, you'd be always having to try to perk her up. You know what I mean? She'd always be just dead inside. You would have to not only keep yourself motivated 24 hours a day, but she would be like the project that never ends. Wouldn't you agree, Luke?
No. That's not how I experienced them. They are disassociating when they perform sex, right? So, but outside of that, they pretty much feel like anyone else in their socioeconomic circle. So I knew plenty of porn stars who enjoyed reading books, and I would discuss books with them. That some of them are very funny. They have all the traits that you would expect coming from their particular socioeconomic circumstance and their level of intelligence. They do not come across as dead inside. And as you get to know them as human beings, it becomes much more difficult to sexually objectify them, because you learn about their vulnerabilities and you learn about their humanity. And so some of them are volunteers in their wider community. They do some beautiful things. They're complicated people. But if you got to know them, if you got to know Lily Phillips, you would not experience her as someone who's dead inside. I guarantee you.
What's next? You're going to tell me they got great relationships with their fathers? What's
No, they're flawed, and there is a distinguishing characteristic that most porn stars are not close with their families and are not particularly close with any particular community. They don't have strong in-group identities, and they don't have an allegiance to a traditional value system. But you would not experience them as dead inside. What happens is that we confuse domains with totality. So in their sex work, yeah, they dissociate, but they're not dissociating most of the time when you're interacting with them. Now, they're not likely to become mothers of the year. Most of them are not likely to become great wives, but if you were on friendly terms with one, interacting with her outside of her sex work, I guarantee you would not describe her as dead inside. Yeah, some do, but people will be dead inside in some domains of their life. Many people are dead inside when they go to work. Right? Most people hate their job, and most people will demonstrate varying degrees of being dead inside when they are at work. But then as soon as they get off work, they're a completely different person. They will launch into their hobbies with tremendous enthusiasm. They will come alive. They will be filled with joy. So people, when they're doing something onerous, right, they will often deaden themselves. And that's not just sex workers. That's pretty much everybody. So these are funny, human, touching, sometimes kind, insightful. They run the full gamut of the human experience. Very few professional sex workers that I have dealt with would I describe outside of their sex work as dead inside. Virtually none. So a significant number of them become sober in porn work. For many of them, working in pornography is a step up. That prior to entering the industry, they had out of control drugging and drinking problems. And through going to the industry and then developing friends and community, they were able to get the help that they needed, and they were able to sober up from drugs or alcohol. So people generally aren't dropping out of medical school or law school to enter the porn industry. Right? A large percentage of these women, right, were coming from something worse. Right? They were at a lower state prior to entering the porn industry. And when they entered the porn industry, they develop friends and community and are able to start getting their lives on track by getting a handle, for example, on a drinking or drugging addiction.
Mm-hmm. And what does the liberal mindset think when the rubber meets the road, whereas you're not supposed to judge them for being so promiscuous, but at the same time, they have real life ramifications for having so many sexual partners? What's the liberal mindset say about that intersection there? That
okay, so biggest difference between, say, the liberal and the conservative mindset is that conservatives overwhelmingly believe that people are close to 100% responsible for their own lives, and liberals overwhelmingly believe that people are not responsible for their own lives, that their lives are much more a function of community. And I'm kind of in the middle, if not more predisposed to the liberal perspective. Lily Phillips, in a different community and in a different family, would not be a sex worker. She's only a sex worker because she lives in London, because she grew up with a particular worldview, and because she has somewhat distant relationships with other people. So the sex workers, I think, are to a large degree a reflection of a large swath of our society. And so they're doing the best they can with what they have, right? They are looking for love, and they experience attention as the closest and easiest thing to fill their hole in their soul that needs love. And so it strikes us as maladaptive, but I guarantee you there are all sorts of things that you and I do that are quite maladaptive and that plenty of sex workers would recognize the maladaptive habits that we have going on. So it's very easy to spot maladaptive habits in other people, but other people can spot the maladaptive habits that we have.
Well, the other thing I was going to say about, I would think a peril of dating someone like her down the road, let's say after she's retired, would be just normal fun in the sack might not be fun enough for her. If she hasn't disassociated as much as you think she has, she might have some sexual quirks that are out there. You wouldn't think that would come along with the business of being so promiscuous?
Well, it's very hard to maintain a sexual relationship with anyone, right? Typically, the intensity of a sexual relationship is 1/2 after just 6 weeks. So, yeah, there are downsides to marrying and hitching your wagon to a former sex worker, but virtually almost nobody is able to maintain sexual passion within a committed relationship. So the idea that sex workers need kinky extreme sex, I think, is overwhelmingly a myth, right? This is something that they are doing to get what feels like love, and they're quite happy to abandon doing it when they start to sense the real thing. So typically when porn stars and sex workers leave that line of work and they marry and settle down, they don't want to think about, acknowledge, or discuss their sex work. Many of them are quite happy to settle down, become a wife and a mother, and to completely leave this behind. So no, I don't think they would be the same bet as a woman who's a virgin or has been highly selective in her sexual choices prior to marriage. But their purported desire for sexual extreme behavior is not going to be one of the top 5 things that dooms the relationship.
I don't know. I was, for some reason,
I don't know any. I mean, I did not know any sex worker who had a personal desire for sexual extremism. It was a performance, and just like the people who put their physical health and their mental health on the line to play professional football, virtually none of them desire to do the same thing once they're retired. Right? Virtually none of them would do the same thing if they weren't being paid millions of dollars a year.
You know, me being a weed smoker, I have no room to talk for what I'm getting ready to ask you. But you talking about them disassociating makes me think that maybe they would tend to have drug problems. What do you think?
Yeah, some of them do, but a large number of them get sober in the industry. They have disassociation problems or advantages. People disassociate because they're doing the best they can with their particular circumstances. So a large number of them were sexually molested. So if you were sexually molested, Kip, you too would, as a kid, you too likely would have developed disassociation. I probably developed disassociation to deal with some challenges from my early childhood. Disassociation is an adaptive strategy in many circumstances. And the people in the sex industry, just like you and me, are doing the best they can with the tools that they have at their disposal. And disassociation is a very valuable tool compared to the alternative at times. So if you're being sexually molested by your family member or by the neighbor, disassociating when you're a kid is probably the best way to endure that horrible behavior. And it probably becomes a learned helpful pattern for things that you don't want to be fully in the moment with. And then all sorts of habits that begin as adaptive, then over time, when they strengthen and start strangling your life, they become maladaptive. For example, right, I was hit a lot as a kid. And so I developed the ability to be a great liar so that I would minimize getting hit. So developing my lying abilities to minimize getting hit started off as an adaptive habit. Then as I moved into my teens and into my 20s, my ease with lying, which started off as an adaptive process, became maladaptive. It was just too easy for me to dissimulate.
Yeah, I developed a quick wit to avoid ass whippings from my old man. So we all figure out our ways, don't we? I was going to tell you earlier, we were talking about like socioeconomic, I guess maybe tracks that people get on or whatever. And like, there's been a guy I don't really care for. His name's, you know who he is, I think, Jon Meacham. You've mentioned his name.
Yes, the presidential historian. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't like him in Little League. I've never liked him. And like, we came up from the same hometown. Where I live now is the place where he got his college degree here at the University of the South. So I don't know, just for some reason, I don't know if it's I don't like him so much as I don't like what he stood for, you know, because I could see him from when he was young. I could tell there's really nothing special there. But he did have an ass-kissing quality that sometimes you see from a young man. So he was a little bit of that. But, you know, somewhere along 5th grade, he tracks into a place called Macaulay School. That's the place that produced guys like Ted Turner, Pat Robertson, those types. And, you know, I transfer into Booker T. Washington. You know, that's the place that produces bank robbers and things like that. So in some ways, you spend your following decades just trying to get out of something you were tracked into. You get what I mean, Luke? And maybe that's some reason maybe I don't have never cared for Meacham, because I know that, okay, maybe he does have some writing abilities or whatever, but a lot of that stuff is what we used to say, who you know, but it's like how you track through, you know, and that was not an option for me. You think that's just holding a grudge? What do you think that is? Crying over spilt grapes? What's going on there, Luke?
Well, flattering people who have power is usually an adaptive strategy. Infuriating people who have power is usually a maladaptive strategy. So there are at least 10 Jon Meachams for every person who speaks truth to power. So he's had a very successful career. And in part, that's because he flatters people who have the power to improve his career. And I think more people are like Jon Meacham than his opposite.
Right. And I guess it depends on, you know, what you're after. You know, he's probably had to kiss so much butt since I've even had to check in for a job at the last time. You get what I'm saying, Luke? So what's important?
Yeah, I do. When Marilyn Monroe got a big contract, she said to the reporters, I guess I won't have to suck so many dicks now.
But
right, very few actresses become stars without sucking the dicks of powerful men.
Right. So I don't know. And it's weird because I used to run around the Chattanooga Times all through the 80s when my mom worked there. And that just happened to be where John went to work when he finished high school, you know? And so, and where did I end up? Where did I live in? The place that John went to get his degree, I guess 30 years before me or whatever. So we just have different tracks, but we don't talk about caste systems in America, but there are that. But it's just when we're on that baseball diamond, when we were kids, you don't realize any of that stuff is there. It's only as you get a little bit older, do they start sort. There's even different levels to it. You know, John went to the highest level prep school, but you know, there's a level 2, and then there's a level 3, and then there's different levels to the public schools. You know, so that sorting out thing.
I do think we have a sense of that. By age 2, we learn to lie to avoid getting punished. So people learn very early on in life to tell other people what they want to hear. And some people are just better at it than others, but it is a human adaptation that begins in our earliest years.
Mm-hmm. And a caste system is nothing that was ever spoken about. It was just something that you had to like see. You know what I'm saying?
Right. In England, it's just so clear, the different social classes. But in America, people like to think of it as a classless society, but of course that's absurd. that there are social classes, and people who earn, I see this particularly in Orthodox Jewish life because it's now the community I know best, people who earn well over $100,000 a year don't have many friends who earn less than that, right? People who earn $500,000 a year and more primarily hang out with other people who earn $500,000 a year and more. And people who earn under $100,000 a year primarily hang out with other people who earn under $100,000 a year. And the worst problem with being an addict is that healthy people won't hang out with you, that your company is usually going to be that of your fellow addicts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess you could say that like that's probably been the story of my life is maybe the station I'm sitting at feels good, but yet I'll hang out with somebody for a week or two and you'd be like, whoa, look how much money you got to spend just to hang out with that guy, you know, in the circles that he runs in. You're not that, you know, you're not that. And a lot of times that stuff is overrated, you know.
I think we all get used to luxury very quickly. So I remember when I moved in with this woman, and one of her observations was that how quickly I assimilated to luxury, how I wanted to sit in the most comfortable chair, and that I really enjoyed the luxuries that she had. And so ostensibly I was all about pursuing truth, but I very quickly took to luxury. Most people will very quickly enjoy luxury. Most people will quickly see that the nice things in life are really nice, and they will be loath to give them up.
The word is seductive, Luke. They're very seductive, aren't they?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why, like, I don't know, one of those stories from the Far East is when a monk comes to visit a family and they go out and get him all nice stuff and put together a nice room with a big fluffy pillow, and he has to kind of break it down for him. You know, I just need my plain white rice and fish heads, and I sleep on a brick. You know what I mean? Because all that stuff Luke's talking about is right. It's all seductive, you know.
Yeah. But the monk is also probably heavily reliant on other people thinking that he's some extraordinary spiritual figure. So those who are most abstemious with regard to pleasure and leisure and luxury, right, they are getting off. They are getting a great deal of their sense of self from manipulating you into thinking that they are some, great spiritual master. So that monk who disdains luxury goods, he's not necessarily any finer, any more reliable, any more moral than your neighbor who loves luxury goods. There's absolutely no correlation between embracing or disdaining luxury goods and being a reliable, decent person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. That monk is very likely, molesting some boy.
10-4. Yeah, I can't speak for him, but I have an affinity for that statement because that's the way I am. When you look in my cupboards, most of the stuff says great value. Now, you probably don't know what great value is, but that's the Walmart house brand. You know what I mean? So my spaghetti sauce is great value, and the spaghetti noodles are great value, and all up in the instant potatoes are great value, and just all up and down the line. Because I've checked that product and I've checked it against the standard bearers for whatever that particular food is, and if it comes up and meets it, it doesn't have to be any better, but just about as good. That's good enough.
Right.
So,
I had no idea what that was, and most Jews don't shop at Walmart.
They don't?
Nope. They shop at Whole Foods.
Oh my gosh, man! You can get hit with $1,000 with a buggy full of food in that place.
Yeah, but you'll run into your fellow Jew there, and you'll do a deal that makes you far more money than you're spending on your groceries.
10-4. I was going to say that Cal and Kim Adab and Elliot and I, sometimes I feel like we're just like decadent gay French kings, like with giant turkey legs in our hands, ordering our news jester Luke Ford to perform for us. Do you ever get that? You know what I mean? Do you ever get that feeling that?
Nope. I don't, because I never perform for you. I'm happy to tell you the opposite of what you want to hear. And there's virtually none of my sense of self is reliant upon praise from anyone on the show anyway. Like the people whose opinions most matter to me don't watch my show.
Now, I guess I'm feeling less like a gay French king, because you're keeping us on our toes of when the Luke Ford production is going to drop. So I feel like one of these like rap guys. I've got to go meet the neighborhood rap guy just to figure out, what time the Luke Ford production is going to drop, so I can get this week's mixtape or whatever. It used to be a little bit more 7:45.
Yeah.
Yeah, 7:45, and I can catch you at 10 or 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning or whatever. But I was going to say it might be a good thing that AI is starting to make everybody a little bit cynical, because maybe we do need a more cynical side to human nature. Your famous thing is you say we did not evolve to be a gullible, but I'm just telling you, even from the time, if you remember when Orson Welles did his War of the Worlds or whatever, and so many people actually thought the world was coming to an end, or even the hop to a coin. I mean, I've mentioned it before. You're finding people that'll actually buy that shit, to think about what that woman was even famous for. And now you're buying a crypto coin from her. So a little bit of
the point of that saying we did not evolve to be gullible is we did not evolve to be gullible on matters that are important. So to enter into a TV show or a novel or a movie, you have to put yourself in an imaginary universe. So gullibility in that sense, when you're watching a TV show or reading a novel, that's an adaptive trait. And if you throw down $20 that you can spare on a Hawk Tour coin, that's something you can talk about with your friends, and it's entertaining. And you can also discuss and claim to buy into, or even buy into, all sorts of conspiracy theories, which would seem to undercut the statement, we did not evolve to be gullible. But just saying that you believe the earth is flat, there's no price to be paid, right? That's not an important thing for your adaptation and your ability to transmit your genetics to the next generation. We did not evolve to be gullible in those things that are of vital importance to our survival. Now, with things that where it's adaptive to be gullible, such as entering into a fictional story, we have that ability. So when you're talking about things that are just for fun, when you're talking about conversation starters, that there are all sorts of silly things where it's adaptive to appear to be gullible.
I'm just saying, in the wake of all this AI that we are apparently getting ready to be bombarded with, we're going to need to have a healthy dose of cynicism, or otherwise you're going to be believing all a manner of stuff that just ain't real. You get what I'm saying, Luke?
No, but you get it's only on things that are vitally important. It makes no difference to the quality of life for 99.99% of people whether or not they believe the world is flat. Makes no difference to the quality of life, 99.99%, whether or not they believe in evolution. Right? It just makes no difference. So if you believe something about 19th century Moldovan poetry that is false, that's going to have nothing to do with the quality of your life. So people are absolutely unharmed by believing all sorts of things that are not true, because it has nothing to do with the quality of your life. It only matters if it's vitally important to your survival. If it's not vitally important to your survival, then believe all the false things you want, because frequently it's quite adaptive to believe in them.
Well, I mean, that's simple enough. People construct these delusions or glom onto a religious ideology in an attempt to escape the horror, the void of complete loneliness. That's what I see.
Yeah, everyone does. I mean, you're not exception. There's no escape from the void except with the construction of a hero system. And effectively, everyone has a hero system which gives them opportunities to feel heroic.
Mm-hmm. The last thing I was just going to say is it's only been, I guess it's still less than 5 months, or only about 5 months, since the elite media, all of them, every damn one of them, was telling us that Joe Biden for the next 4.5 years was the best option for us. That's hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, we just seen him just fall off a cliff, and Had they had their
it's only hard to believe if you don't understand that different people experience the world differently. Once you understand that different people have different genetics and different socialization and therefore experience the world differently, it's not at all hard to understand.
But if the elite media had had their druthers, weak, fragile Joe Biden would have had to punch in and punch out from the presidency for another, 49 months? 50 months?
No, they just wanted to defeat Donald Trump. They would have been happy to have had Joe Biden replaced the minute he defeated Donald Trump.
He was just a body with a name other than Donald Trump. That's what that was all about, huh?
Exactly. There's no media loyalty to Joe Biden. It's simply instrumental. He was instrumental in defeating Donald Trump. When he became a liability for defeating Donald Trump, then the media turned against him in a brutal fashion.
Yeah, the days are getting short now, so you're appreciated now more than ever, Luke. I appreciate you, buddy.
Thanks, buddy. Good to talk to you.
Yeah.
Take care. Okay, let's play a little bit from Mark Halperin's morning show here.
On the RNC and on the team, just as much as the outside groups, is they don't think you're doing what they want. But the ability, like look at this lineup that he's got. It's called AmFest. It's in another week in Phoenix. Donald Trump is going.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
And by the way,
it's a joke how many big people are going to that thing.
But here's the kicker: people fight people normally get paid to go to events as speakers, whatever. There are people falling over themselves to get in front of his audience.
I got to read you. Then keep going. I got to find the names.
Just,
all right.
And with
Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, Glenn Beck, Steve Bannon, Ben Shapiro, Mike Johnson, Donald Trump Jr., Ben Carson, Ted Cruz. I'm reading everyone. Byron Donalds, Matt Gaetz, Danica Patrick. I mean, it goes on here, just endless. But I think we all know that this is similar to what happened with talk radio in the 80s, which is because the liberals have the New York Times, they don't feel they need to have this stuff come up. But this piece of being, Alex Castellanos is producing the show by texting me throughout the program. And Alex points out correctly that Charlie Kirk and Bannon are outsiders, even though they have virtually unlimited capacity to communicate with Team Trump and Republicans on Capitol Hill. They're still outsiders, and that's a huge advantage. Because like somebody put in the chat, I think George Soros, he's not the same thing at all, but he's also not an outsider, right? Part of the strength of these entrepreneurial folks, and again, we keep talking about Bannon and Charlie Kirk, there's many others. Tucker would be in the same category, right? They just
remember the widespread universal derision directed at Charlie Kirk by the alt-right, the alt-light, by Nick Fuentes fans, by Richard Spencer fans. Charlie Kirk is among the 20 most powerful people in American politics, right? Charlie Kirk is among the 400 most powerful people in the United States. And Nick Fuentes, he would not rank anywhere close to that. So Charlie Kirk was a widespread object of derision for people in the distant right, but Charlie Kirk had Steve Saylor as a guest on his show. Charlie Kirk was a key part of Donald Trump's victory. Charlie Kirk, Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, these are people with significant real-world power and influence, as opposed to Nick Fuentes and Richard Spencer and these other alt-right, alt-light characters who overwhelmingly have had far more of a disruptive and negative influence on people's lives.
Yeah,
they're in the arena daily because of their programs.
But the difference is between, I'd say that Tucker and Bannon are more akin to Rush Limbaugh, right? They have this massive audience that is very beholden to them.
I hate to interrupt. They have that, but they're also involved. They're like, Joni Ernst is out of line.
So it's not their rhetorical brilliance that makes Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, and Tucker Carlson so powerful and influential and popular. That's a part of it, but it's the whole package, right? It's not just the rhetorical brilliance. It's not just the shocking clarity of their insights. It's their whole package of meeting people's emotional needs and their social, political needs.
Let's move.
Right. I was gonna go
Rush
there.
didn't
What
do
I'm saying
that
is-
operationally. He just did
Right.
it from the microphone. That's a big difference.
No,
Look,
that's where I was going with this.
I mean,
which
the
is-
Sorry.
yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, the Democrats-
Dan, let Sean finish because I interrupted him.
No, I was just going to say, I think that back in the day, Rush, I mean, when Rush said something, everyone in the movement knew about it, right? They have taken that to an exponential level and operationalized it to say, okay, now do the following. Charlie's taken it to an even bigger level because he's got an army to mobilize. Get out the vote, knock on doors, go do this, buy these products. Like they've started to establish an alternative economy where people are buying things and supporting things. We have built on it. And I think to Dan's point, there's not the modern version of that. The Democrats, let's not kid ourselves. They've got corporate America, Hollywood, academia, the government. I mean, like it's not.
It's got Emily's List, the labor's unions.
They do.
Right,
But again, here's what those groups lack. I hate to keep repeating myself, but I think this is so important. Emily's List does not have a daily show with a huge audience, number one.
No,
Number two,
I get it, Mark.
Daily List isn't talking to the Biden people every day, 1,000 texts saying, what are we going to do about this thing? And I'll tell you another difference, which Sean pointed out. Emily's List is not going to cross the Democrats.
Well, that's not true. I mean,
they will
so,
sometimes, but not in the same way. Not in the same way.
No, I mean, look, here we are. We spend all this time talking about how Democrats have these litmus tests and the outside groups put straitjackets on people. They do have, look, Democrats lost. So our infrastructure needs to be re-examined because we thought labor, and like a month ago, we were talking about the vaunted Democratic ground game, right? That was labor and all these outside groups, the Democracy Alliance, billion-dollar investments in this stuff. And we thought our infrastructure was superior and was the edge. We were wrong. So we have to take a fresh look at how we spend money and everything. You're right, Mark. We don't have Charlie Kirk. We don't have a Steve Bannon that is kind of a political celebrity, an influencer that, to Sean's point, Charlie Kirk has got people on the ground. When Democracy Alliance holds its semi-annual meetings, Democrats clamor for invites. It is the thing to get. Now, it's not public. It's not on Instagram.
And that's a big difference.
All right, a powerful critique of Rumble at the New York Times, and I have great gratitude for Rumble. I'm glad it's there, but there are powerful critiques of Rumble at the same time. So here's this New York Times essay after the author watched 47 hours of Rumble. Just a few hours into the experiment, it's clear that I was falling into an alternate reality fueled almost entirely by outrage. And that would be an accurate statement for most of right-wing talk radio as well. Among the claims I heard, some people at think tanks in Washington were morons and crazier than any schizophrenic, that the Department of Homeland Security was running a sex trafficking operation, a claim based on a misreading of a government report. Progressives were trying to get Republicans killed. After only one day, I could feel my perspective shifting. When I described to my wife what I was hearing on Rumble, she said I was right to feel uneasy because the world I was immersing myself in sounded genuinely awful. Hour by hour, Rumble hosts stoked fears about nearly everything: culture wars, transgender Americans, even a potential World War III. Do you guys know where your fallout shelters are? I heard that World War III was imminent because of rising tensions with Russia that most Americans were unaware of. Clayton Morris, former Fox News personality who co-hosts a show with his wife, seems convinced that nuclear war is coming, and he describes the lack of fallout shelters in major cities throughout the United States. The coverage struck me as scary. Now, does Morris have any credentials as a Russia-Ukraine expert? No. Other shows reference clips directly from Russian state television or the Russian government. The prospect of an impending World War III stuck with me long after the live streams ended. As I shuttled my son to daycare or walked down the aisle at the grocery store, found my mind drifting to thoughts of nuclear bombs, a military draft, or how a global conflict might unfold. While watching a segment on the dire prediction of nuclear war, I glanced over at my wife, who was enjoying Netflix's romantic comedy series Nobody Wants This, and she was just blissfully unaware about the threat of nuclear winter. That is a fun Netflix series. Romantic comedy about a sex podcaster woman who falls for a reform rabbi. As the days ticked by on Rumble, I saw how the outrage stoked online could burst into the real world. We had multiple hosts on Rumble furious over a Democratic official in Pennsylvania who they suggested was trying to steal the election. Reading news articles, though, it was clear the situation was more complicated than the host had suggested. And Dan Bongino, host, relished the moment. Who's in charge now? He said triumphantly. Who made this a story? Us. Seemed that the actual news and objective details about complex situations such as election proceedings or the war in Ukraine mattered far less than how these situations could be contorted to support Donald Trump or to deride Democrats. Nearly every show created a visceral feeling that the nation was barreling from crisis to crisis. Progressives were getting away with galling levels of incompetence or corruption. Even though Trump and the Republican parties would soon control the White House and Congress, conservatives have a majority on the Supreme Court. There were major battles to come. After just a week, this alternate reality started shifting how I instinctively reacted to the world outside of Rumble. I would catch a stray story on the local news about something innocuous, and I'd wonder, can I really trust this? Excellent Netflix series on Mr. McMahon, on Vince McMahon and the world of professional wrestling and how he brought his family into the show.
I totally look back on some of the stuff I did and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Yeah, for sure.
This is his daughter.
Did you think it was weird that your dad was having you do that?
Yes, sometimes I thought it was a little bit weird, but it was a different time in our business.
Of all the crazy...
I mean, pimping your daughter out, putting her in sexually transgressive situations and encouraging hundreds of thousands of people to think of your daughter as a slut could might rub some people the wrong way. But this is what Vince McMahon and his daughter did.
Stuff that's happened in my life, from starting out as a fan to where I...
Yeah, it's horrible, right? That'd probably be the majority reaction. On the other hand, it was show business. Not easy to make a career in show business, and you have to suck a lot of dicks and lose a lot of dignity to break in often.
The family part of it would probably be the craziest.
Right. The man who's speaking starred in many of those risque sets, including the one where he puts a roofie in a drink and then hauls her off to get married in Vegas. Well, he does end up marrying the daughter in real life.
So after this storyline where Steph gets married to me secretly against her will, it became this whole thing, the McMahon-Helmsley era, and now we're running WWE.
The McMahon-Helmsley era.
So she marries a wrestler. Sharp comment here from Art Bell. I noticed the lower focus on big names here in Luke Forward World versus the past. We don't get as many big names. Yes, so journalism focuses on who. Journalists tend to attribute events to individuals. Academics tend to attribute events primarily to structures. So journalists and popular discussions look at individuals making history, and academics and scholars tend to see individuals as stuck in some interlocking series of structures. And so I definitely lean more towards the academic scholarly view of reality. So yes, individuals can make history, but overwhelmingly people act within the matrix of particular communities and particular structures. So generally, structures will shape more about how the world works than individuals.
That's where I'm with her every day. And that's how we get to know each other, really.
I was not allowed to date our talent, but it was my dad who, ironically, sort of pushed us together.
Paul is a wonderful human being. He and I were friends. And I would even lead and say, Steph, you need to find somebody, a real man, someone like Triple H.
And then my brother would say, not Triple H. And my dad would go, oh yeah, no, of course, not Triple H, but a guy just like him.
Shane was very much against it, vehemently so.
Shane's his brother.
Hey, brothers, come on, give me a hug.
Storylines 101, don't date the boss's daughter.
Shane told me, Dad, you're gonna let your daughter date a wrestler? I've had a little bit of a problem with that, because he sometimes, is you getting too close to real now?
Talking to his son.
This is a storyline, it's characters, entertaining the audience. Just go with it.
So he had a character that Vince McMahon was carrying on an affair with this gorgeous model while he was drugging his wife, Linda McMahon, so she wasn't aware of what's going on, or to set up some fight on stage where the son takes down the father. And so the pictures show Vince McMahon flaunting his relationship with this fitness model.
So 15 years later,
she is the fitness model.
I'll do interviews. We'll talk about the good old days, and it never fails. It will always be like, so there was this time, and I'm like, when you got on all four and you bark like a dog.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
You're sorry? Well, I'll tell you what, if you're that sorry, then prove to me just how sorry you are. Get on your hands and knees like a dog. Oh, for God's...
Right, it's the same sort of emotional manipulation that you see with OnlyFans, appealing to the most primal of emotions.
The bark like a dog scene obviously is very memorable, and it was really, yeah, I wish they never did that one.
I used to have a female dog, and that bitch did everything I told her to do. Now, damn it, get out! Get out! That's just too much. Bark like a dog. Come on, tell me you're sorry.
With the barking like a dog segment, they want me to be like, it was horrible. But that's exactly the feeling we wanted you to feel. Don't you get it?
If you're really, really sorry, Trish, take your clothes off. I said take it off now.
Right, this is Vince McMahon with this
that is an
fitness
amazing
model.
have your cake and eat it too kind of heel performance, because at the same time that he's getting everybody to know that we're supposed to hate him, he's giving them a titty show.
Oh, you're sorry. You're sorry. Take your bra off and take it off now.
Knowing that he's bad for doing so doesn't get in the way of the pleasure of watching her be humiliated.
I thought the segment sucked when I saw it, but, you know, wrestling was very much for guys. And guys who fantasized over hot women, but also kind of hated them because they could never get them. So therefore, seeing hot women demeaned was kind of cool to a lot of those guys. It's a very ugly way to say it, but that's exactly what it was.
We knew we were presenting a sensitive scene to the fans, and we knew that it was going to be talked about, and we knew it was going to be interpreted and misinterpreted.
Right, how badly do you want a career in show business? Right, how badly do you want to be famous? Then how much of your dignity are you willing to shed? So it's the same force that is shaping OnlyFans creator Lily Phillips and shaping professional wrestling and shaping people in live streaming and podcasting and entertainment, right? How badly do you need to be successful, and how much are you willing to sacrifice for attention?
But we were aware of that. And the thing is, when we did that scene, we knew the comeuppance would come at WrestleMania, the grandest stage of all.
Resolution of that story. Oh, it feels so good.
So Donald Trump is adept at appealing to these same primordial emotions as professional wrestlers.
For Vince, nothing was off limits. What's real, what's not real, it doesn't matter.
Right. You are more likely to be successful if nothing is off limits than if you have the sacred in your life.
If it's going to draw money, if it's going to draw interest, anything that makes his business stronger is open for him.
I want you to give your mother a message, and that is that soon, after this divorce is final, there's going to be a new Mrs. McMahon.
Right. He's talking about his wife there, Linda McMahon, our future Secretary of Education in the Trump administration. Right. Terrific interview, terrific article on Rumble. The author watches 47 hours of Rumble and then writes about it. The fear and outrage that infused every show was offset by a sense of hopeful of hope that the president-elect Donald Trump would fix everything, even that the planet might have been saved because he was reelected.
We won the election 2 weeks ago today. It is not an exaggeration to say the planet might have been saved by the fact that we won the election 2 weeks ago today. It is not an exaggeration.
All right, that's Charlie Kirk. So the biggest cheerleader for Trump was perhaps Dan Bongino. He had 3.4 million followers on Rumble. He's a former Fox News host who ran unsuccessfully 3 times for elected office before striking gold in the right-wing commentary business. He has one of the top podcasts in the country. He owns 6% of Rumble. I listened to an hour of Dan Bongino's opinions every day. Seemed like I learned mostly about what various progressive or mainstream media figures had said about different cultural war topics, and then Dan Bongino's predictable reactions to them. So on one Thursday show, he talked about, let's see if I can, am I able to, talked about the nation's intelligence apparatus, but it was in response to what a CNN host had said about its effectiveness. Can't seem to play. No, won't play. Talked about cancel culture, but in response to a comment on The View.
This woman on The View.
Come on, man.
Sunny Hostin. This is a perfect example of this little conundrum the Democrats find themselves in.
Come on, man. Can't seem to play that. He talks about identity
Here's
politics.
Jasmine Crockett. Please keep this stuff up. This identity politics is such a winner for you guys on the left. I want to fund a PAC. Check this out.
You can then misuse words like oppression.
Talked about the murder conviction of an illegal immigrant, but in reaction to what a news anchor had said.
And he was paroled and released for further processing by ICE.
Folks, that segment goes on for about another minute.
Nearly every show I watched on Rumble framed issues this way, focusing on how news was discussed by mainstream media and then complain about it. Don't remember seeing Dan Bongino criticize Donald Trump. He spent the first part of the week saying that Matt Gaetz would surely be confirmed as Attorney General. So here we go.
Using good or bad as a metric to appoint people who could change the country for the better, you're going to lose because they're all bad. So forget it. So all I'm trying to say to you is if you're using good or bad as a metric to appoint people who could change the country for the better, you're going to lose because they're all bad.
After watching Rumble nonstop for days, I realized this very article was likely to fuel its own cycle of outrage on the platform. But I was surprised when that happened before it was even published. I wrote to everyone mentioned in the article to ask for their perspective about Rumble and its popular shows. Few replied, but people like Russell Brand took one of my emails and made an entire segment out of it. Dan
So
Bongino,
Stuart Thompson, who today we have declared public enemy #1 on the Dan Bongino show.
Ugh. This is so lowbrow.
Part of the show. We're in charge now. Chew on that shit. I'm serious, by the way. Don't ever email us. Don't. Because you're going to become part of the show. We're in charge.
Right, these right-wing shows have a high quotient of moronic content. Dan Bongino said some important things. He has some useful insights. For all I know, he might make a great director of the U.S. Secret Service, right? He used to be employed in the Secret Service. And then we talk about ads for a nuclear fallout health kit.
Got contacted by New York Times.
Here we go.
This week. I don't know if you know that.
No, cool.
Well, no. They're writing a hit piece on all podcasters. We're in it, so that's kind of cool.
Oh, cool.
About how we constantly talk about nuclear war and all these scary things, and then we push products immediately after. But I said we're educating our audience because you guys have literally tried to kill us. Your side literally tried to kill us. So
Yeah, that's true.
that's how companies like the TWC, the wellness company, started. Is you couldn't get ivermectin during COVID.
Yeah, Dennis Prager also advertises for the wellness company. This article isn't a hit job. All right, I think it's pretty fair. Steve Bannon, host of War Room, relayed a message that his show exists as the information arm for the activist cadre at the tip of the spear of the MAGA movement. Candace Owens was the only one who called me back. She said she was focusing less on political outrage lately after growing weary of chasing negativity. I realized I was waking up every day and I was looking for things to be angry at, and that wasn't healthy for me. Candace Owens. Thank God she's the voice of sanity. Didn't expect to be saying that.
Difference.
Oh, I hear
There's
you.
no
that
grassroots. Democracy Alliance couldn't organize a one-car parade, as Bill Clinton would say.
Well,
it's all
look, that's
elites.
not
It's
true.
all inside.
The
It's all
Democratic-
insider elites. They don't have grassroots Democracy Alliance. They do a lot of stuff. They don't. What's
well,
the
no,
grassroots
they
of Democracy
fund
Alliance?
people who do grassroots.
That's
I mean, look,
different.
Mark, I think
That's
the difference
different.
is there is infrastructure. It's just we need to modernize our infrastructure. But the Democratic Party doesn't lack.
Right, this is Dan Turrentine here on the right of your screen. He is a Democratic consultant. He was formerly chief of staff for Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado. And I think he is admirably fair-minded.
It lacks these capabilities today. You and I
But
texted
I'll
about
just
this in March.
but Dan, I'll just say again, because the language you're using is I think misleading, with all due respect. It's not like the RNC said, "Hey, I heard about this Steve Bannon guy and this Charlie Kirk guy and this Tucker Carlson guy.
get it.
Call him up. Let's hire him." This is organic, and it's so different. And again, look at Joni Ernst. Did the transition get Joni Ernst back in line? Yeah, they played a role. But I think who really got Joni Ernst back in line is the MAGA entrepreneurs.
But hold on a sec, Mark. I don't know which came first, like the chicken or the egg. The fact that Donald Trump, when he was running in 2015, was the outsider, and he gave Bannon the audience, like he gave him credibility. He has invested in Charlie Kirk himself. If Donald Trump turned on Charlie Kirk and had waved him off and whatever, he probably is influential. But like it comes from the top. They are.
So I was watching last night's San Francisco 49er versus Los Angeles Rams game, and a key San Francisco 49er linebacker, Devondre Campbell, he refused to play because he wasn't started in the game. And the 49ers have a bunch of hurt linebackers, so they were in desperate straits fighting for an opportunity to go to the playoffs, and he quit on the team. He refused to play. And I was trying to think of other professional athletes who weren't hurt and refused to play. And I remember Scottie Pippen, when the coach drew up a last-second play where Scottie Pippen was not featured, where Scottie Pippen was not going to shoot the ball, he refused to play. So I was thinking, like, what other famous athletes have refused to play? Because we did not evolve this way. If you spend your entire life among a small tribe, you're unlikely to quit on your tribe because then they'll expel you and you'll very likely die. So this is a photo of Ben Simmons, who frequently quit on the Philadelphia 76ers. He's an Australian, quit on his team. Zion Williamson of the New Orleans Pelicans often quit on his team and lied about it. Joey Galloway, wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks, quit on his team. Kenny Anderson quit on the Portland Trailblazers, and they traded him to Toronto. Kerry Collins, and he had a drug and alcohol addiction, quit on the Carolina Panthers. Pavel Bure, hockey player for Vancouver Canucks, quit on his team. Andre Bletch, who played basketball for the Washington Wizards, quit on his team. Kawhi Leonard has quit on multiple teams, including San Antonio Spurs. John Riggins quit on the Washington Redskins. J.D. Drew quit on Philadelphia Phillies. John Wall quit on the Houston Rockets. Le'Veon Bell quit on the Pittsburgh Steelers. He didn't want to play for just $14.5 million in 2018, so he sat out the year, made no money at all. Eric Lindros quit for his hockey team. Bo Jackson vowed to never play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so he didn't. Ben Simmons repeatedly quit on the Philadelphia 76ers, and then Scottie Pippen quit on the Chicago Bills when he wasn't going to get the ball in a particular play. So just like, what does this have to do with Lily Phillips? Right? These are all examples of highly maladaptive behavior if you're living in a tribal world. If you're going to spend your entire life just among a small group of people and you quit on your group, that's not going to be a good life strategy. Only the anonymity of today's world, where you don't feel traditional stirrings of loyalty. Are you able to just quit on your tribe and just quit on your team? It just feels, particularly from a right-wing perspective, just feels awful. You would not want these people in your life.
They're independent. It is organic. The Trump energy is organic. The Trump movement is organic. And I think they're a part of that. But if they turned on Trump, I would be curious to see, if they would still have power if Donald Trump went after them, right?
Right.
So I think they're not that independent.
Sean, somebody put in the chat, again, I never read the chat, but I happen to know, somebody put in the chat, Pod Save America. How is the full functionality of Pod Save America different than what we're talking about on the right? Because there are some similarities.
Yeah, I mean, I think initially, the funny thing is, I think if you look at the trajectory and put them over the top, I think Pod Save America went like this, but then it flattened, and Charlie just kept going up. So they lacked the organizational aspect of it, right? So I think initially out of the gate, the first couple of years, they were very well versed.
Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. I mean, they don't do this to me. Here I am, the greatest writer of my generation. They don't do this to me. I am coming back here 100 times if I have to. These losers, these lowlives. Who do they think they are? They can't do this to me. I refuse to bow down to those in power who won't accept reality. Damn them.
But here they were well, and they have a big audience. But here's what I think is different about them: is name anything they've ever changed in the real world.
Well, hold on a second. Let's see how all of this does once they have to govern. Like in 2 years, let's see if this machine is together and
totally agree.
So which famous podcaster or pundit would you most like to see running things? Like, who do you think would be the most reasonable, responsible, and effective as the executive of something?
Totally agree.
Because look, it is very hard. Like, the world happened on Joe Biden's watch. And when you own government, you can't make everybody happy. It is messy. It is a problem. Like, when we look at some of these topics here, like governing is a you-know-what. And so for Donald Trump right now, he is the ultimate woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? You are the outsider. You're saying, I would have done it better, et cetera. So everyone loves you. Everyone's hopes and dreams are still in front of them. But when the reality hits, let's see if this group is as together and in support of Donald Trump.
Sean, what are Donald Trump's 3 biggest political problems right now at a time when he's having a spectacularly good week politically? What are his 3 biggest problems? Take them off.
Mitch McConnell, Lisa Murkowski, and X, meaning not the platform. We'll see who that fill in the blank.
So Chris Cillizza, a veteran Washington Post political reporter, and he lost his job at the Post, and so he's gone independent. And he has a new interview out where he calls Van Jones the most honest man in politics. And I really like Van Jones. Right? This is just a very recent, this week revelation that I have. There's just so much about him that's incredibly honest and raw and truthful and admirable. So this is Chris Cillizza talking with Van Jones. Let's see what it's like.
Heroes that we have. I love Dwayne The Rock Johnson. He's like one of my top 2 or 3 favorite humans on earth. I was
okay, let me slow down the speed.
And yet, when he entered the superhero world, he came in as Black Adam. Yep. He came in as an anti-hero, and throughout the whole movie, he's killing people left and right, just innocent random people. I'm like, this is not great. You look at Deadpool and Wolverine.
It's so true across the culture. It's like, you know what I always think of? Pro wrestling, because that's just something I always grew up with. Like, so in the 80s, the big star is Hulk Hogan, right? Yes. Big old blonde guy. Eat your Wheaties, take your vitamins, work out. Now the heroes are like much more conflicted, right? Like, I don't know if they're villains or anti-heroes, but like it's a much more gray area, right? Like, it's not just like the Iron Sheik is bad because he's from Iran and they're bad, right? And Hogan carries an American flag and he's great. Like, it's so much different, to your point.
And if you look at sort of like the decline and fall of the Marvel Cinematic Universe versus like The Boys on Amazon, where the superheroes are literally the villains. And so there's something going on in the culture where, and I think Donald Trump is in some ways a symptom of some of that, in that like he's kind of like the bad guy. Like, he doesn't mind playing, up the kind of the bad guy role. And reality TV has a lot about, sometimes, even Simon on American Idol was a little bit of the jerk.
Totally.
So there's a cultural piece of this, which I just don't like at all. I am an unapologetic romantic idealist. I do not.
I love that about you.
I believe in the good of people. I believe that, good can overcome.
Look, it's great to be a realist, but to be an idealist, but you should have an ideal of the importance of reality. That should go hand in hand with being an idealist, recognizing the importance of what is real and what is true.
I believe it's good in everyone. And so in some ways I'm out of step, but I believe that shit. I believe it, and I live my life according to it, but the culture's moving another direction. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is, when do people turn to violence? People turn to violence when the nonviolent people can't deliver. The nonviolent people who've been banging on the door of trying to get this healthcare system to work for a long time, for generations, have not produced the goods. Even Obamacare, the signature accomplishment of the best president ever, my beloved Barack Obama, even that, when you talk to everyday people, it's not working as well as advertised. You have a lot of people I pay in, but then I can't meet the premium, and I've got 1,000 problems. So now here we are, well down the road from Obamacare, and we still haven't solved it, and there's no solution on the rise. It's not like doctors running to make it better.
No.
And so it is. I despise violence. I'm a Dr. King guy, but when people turn toward violence, it is in some ways an indictment of those of us who believe the system can work if you vote and you protest and you march and participate. We have to step up our efforts, or there may be more of it. I'm very scared of that.
Right, and that's the thing. It's like, I still remember, and this is different because there's a racial component, but I remember so distinctly. So I was a kid in the '80s in Connecticut, and do you remember Bernie Getz? You remember that name?
Sure.
And there was so Bernie Getz shot several African American kids on the subway,
right?
And there was this response, at least in some circles, I don't know if it was good, but it was, well, think the subway, it's out of control. These people are running rampant. And I was like, yeah, but vigilante, and obviously in retrospect, there was so much racial stuff tied to that, right? But I just remember vigilantism is not something that we should say, oh, well, that's good in any form, because to your point, what are we condoning if we condone that?
Right. So
what's more important, your abstract principles or the reality of life in New York City and on public transport, where people like these kids were making the lives of tens of thousands of people miserable? Why would you not yearn for horrible thugs like these kids to get shot? That's the natural, normal human response.
So look, I think it's an important moment. I'll tell you the other thing too, in a kind of dare to be shallow moment. If he weren't so cute, it'd be a different thing as well.
I know.
Now let's be honest.
Looks matter in every part of life, man.
It's like the look isn't here. If this dude were, look like a wildebeest, then there would have been a different reaction. But he's cute. So there's a lot going on here that is, ultimately going to wind up being I'm sure an Oscar-winning movie. But it's bad. Look, people are hurting and uncertain, and I think a lot of people in our profession, we all went to college, and most of us live on the coast.
Yep.
It is hard to understand. Look, I have people I know and I grew up with. If they got a flat tire.
So there aren't many pundits who I regard as admirable people, but I'm suddenly inclined to regard Van Jones as admirable. But why do I think Van Jones is admirable? Because I've only seen just a few minutes of him. I only know it in a very tiny subsection of life. So if I knew more about Van Jones, as if I knew more about anyone that I regard as admirable, right, the amount of my admiration would surely decrease.
They're done. Done. Because they have the $200, literally don't have the $200, and then they can't get to work, and it becomes
absolutely vicious cycle.
The number one enemy of a lot of people is not Donald Trump, it's not Kamala Harris, it's not the Democrats, it's not the Republicans, it's the check engine light. It's the check engine light. When that thing comes on, you have a problem. Yep. Because you can't, because by the way, you can't even fix your car by yourself. Now the car is a computer on wheels.
Yep.
So you can't even go to your cousin.
No, there's no pulling it over on the side of the road and tinkering with it.
No. You got to go, and you're now a hostage of people who can get the computer, thing put on the car, and that's hundreds of dollars. And so you have a lot of folks, and I think people.
So I'm tempted to say that Van Jones is the most effective communicator on the left.
Do not understand this. They can't survive a flat tire or the check engine light coming on. And everybody is talking all this weird talk about tariffs and inflation, democracy and all this other type of stuff. And like, excuse me, I'm
Totally.
working 2 jobs. My mom is sick. I can't keep her in her nursing thing. Like people are narrating real problems, and we basically are using them as footballs. And so the number one thing that happened in the election, besides that the Republicans beat the pants off of us, was that a lot of people who voted in 2020 just went and sat down. They just, and that's much more dangerous.
Okay, so eloquence is not an effective substitute for truth. So in the battleground states, the turnout was as high as in 2020, right? People who voted in 2020 and didn't vote in 2024, overwhelmingly, it was in states where their vote didn't matter much.
People say, how can you forgive people for voting for Donald Trump? They voted. At least they voted.
That's right. They participated.
They didn't riot, and they didn't sit on the couch. The people concerned about it.
I don't see what's so objectively wonderful about voting, particularly in a state where your vote doesn't matter. So I don't find that a strong point.
So many people, and obviously I live in DC and I'm a journalist, so it's like, I get it. Like I went to private school in New England, I went to Georgetown, and I'm a journalist. I am not the average person.
I get it.
So many people say to me, how the hell did January 6th not matter more? How the hell did, because that was Biden's.
Right. If you're struggling in life, for ordinary American, why on earth would January 6th be one of your top 10 concerns? You'd have to live in a highly abstract world to imagine that this out of control, nasty riot should be one of your top 10 political concerns. For your average person who's struggling to get by and to pay the bills, why on earth would they care about January 6th?
Entire campaign was premised on that. Is that your thought, Van? Like that it's just like that is like a nice to have issue, not like a need to have issue?
Look, bad stuff happens all the time. Stuff happens all the time. If you got folks.
Right. There are horrible left-wing riots, horrible left-wing political riots that interrupted the smooth functioning of the legislature in Wisconsin. We had Black Lives Matter riots that cost the country billions of dollars worth of damage and significantly disrupted the lives of tens of millions of Americans.
Folks living in neighborhoods where they go to funerals once a month, and half the time it's old people sitting in the pews and a person in the casket.
Yep.
That happens all the time. And so when your actual life is on the edge of financial ruin or physical unsafety, something that happened in Washington, D.C. 3 or 4 years ago, which seemed like a bad day for those people, is not the number one thing on your mind.
Yeah.
And
I recognize why people would think that January 6th disqualifies Donald Trump for political office, right? There's a very strong cognitive, intellectual, philosophical, moral, cultural, and political argument there that's very strong. But pragmatically, most people simply don't care. And that is adaptive. There's no reason why most people would make that a number one concern, because what happened on January 6th does not affect their well-being.
I just think that people have to remember that half of the country got sold on it was the FBI that made it happen, that it wasn't real, it was a deep state, that Trump didn't have anything to do with it. I mean, half the country got the whole thing spun.
Well, we do know that while there are apparently no FBI agents in the January 6th riot crowd, there were 26 FBI informants in that crowd.
Fun for them in a way that was like, and don't forget, on the right wing, the first thing they said was, well, Black Lives Matter was burning down cities and nobody did anything about that. Now, what city did Black Lives Matter burn?
I know. Trump said it in either the Time magazine interview or the Meet the Press interview.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Now, what city?
He says the same stuff always over and over again, but to your point, like
people believe that American cities were burned to the ground. Where are these American cities that were burned to the ground? How is the Reconstruction going? Like, where are the tent cities for all these refugees from American cities that got burned down? But so you have to say, well, the liberals burned down cities and our guys got out of control and it's all even Steven and big deal about it. And they're trying to use it to beat up our guy and screw them and blah, blah, blah. And they just scoot on past it. Now we know, because we went to school and college, and we believe that a joint session of Congress is not the same as a tire store that got burned down. It's not the same.
No.
For us, a joint session of Congress, and by the way, I don't mean to be rude, if Barack Obama in 2012 had lost to Mitt Romney.
Oh my gosh, I know where you're going.
And Barack Obama had stepped out and given a speech and sicked 10,000 black people on a joint session of Congress, half of them would have been shot down and Obama would be at Guantanamo. So part of it is also when the system doesn't react, people figure it must not be that big a deal.
That's right.
And by the way,
It's good to hear that point because I'm on the right. And so I mainly hear about how Democratic leaning minority groups just get away with everything. And, regular, ordinary Americans are just getting screwed over. Well, it's important to hear the other perspective that Van Jones just gave.
let's take it one step further. If Ilhan Omar had given a speech and 10,000 Muslims had attacked a joint session of Congress, she would have been shot down and all the Muslims would have been shot down and most Muslims would have been sent out of the country. So let's just be very clear that part of it is that there is a rank order of acceptable violence. And for whatever reason, if you're a white guy, including the white guy that just shot this.
Right. So for a lefty, I think he has an admirable commitment to truth, to understanding the other side of the political spectrum.
CEO, there's something acceptable about white violence. The country is just kind of used to it. But if you were black or Muslim, can you imagine if 10,000 Mexicans attacked a joint session of Congress? Like, it's
be
just
covered a lot differently and be treated a lot differently.
Exactly. So there's a racial dimension here, but there's also, on the right, there's they burned down cities, which is a lie. There's a racial dimension here, and then on our side, a lot of our folks. Look, I wish that I'm sure you.
So dozens of people were murdered during Black Lives Matter riots, including police, and billions of dollars of property damage occurred because during Black Lives Matter riots, and the lives of millions of Americans were significantly disrupted, and millions of Americans felt tremendous unnecessary fear because of Black Lives Matter agitation.
You got people who would tell you, I wish January 6th hadn't happened, but man, I wish I could buy some eggs. I wish I could fill up my car. I wish I could. And so you have a lot of people who've heard from Democrats. If you guys want to have abortions every day and never have January 6th happen again, vote for us.
Can I? Yeah.
Other problems.
I want to dig a little bit more on that. All right, so it's a binary choice election, right? It's Harris or Trump. Even with everything you just said, how the hell? This is like my own venting session. This is me needing you to tell me what to think about this stuff. Like, how the hell did a wealthy guy who lived his entire, family wealth, who lived his entire life in New York City, whose entire MO is like glamorous and gilded, but how the hell did he become the guy who was the voice of people who were worried about their car light going on? That's I agree with you 1,000% that the car light thing, I think that's a great way to think about it. My issue is okay, you look at Kamala Harris, whatever you think of Kamala Harris, and you look at Donald Trump. How the hell were people like, yeah, Donald Trump, that's the rich dude with the long ties is definitely the guy.
Oh, well,
because he came across effectively. He created emotion in you that Kamala Harris, by comparison, just seemed wooden.
Stakes is the guy that's going to represent me. Like, how did he do that?
That's not hard to understand. We've been doing that for a while. FDR, the Roosevelts were a wealthy family. The Kennedys, the Kennedys are a wealthy family. Americans trusting rich white guys to save them is been going on for a while.
Thomas Jefferson, as old as time.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson.
This is not something nefarious about white people, right? All groups, all people tend to prefer their own kind. And as the first episode of Yellowstone pointed out in the voice of a Native American, aka Indian character, until they find a cure for human nature, a man's best off with his own kind.
It wasn't a poor guy. So that's not unusual. I mean, listen, the mistake Kamala Harris made was to forget about Karl Rove. Karl Rove said, you have to go after your opponent's strength. Remember that? That's why they swift voted John Kerry.
Yep. Go after the thing. Right. Kerry was the nominee expressly because they thought he has this unimpeachable record and he can make the case against the war in Iraq.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're going to say, here you have George W. Bush, for people who are too young to remember this. You had George W. Bush in 2004 running for re-election after 9/11. He had started these two wars that were not going well. And the Democrats ran John Kerry, a decorated 3 times Purple Heart decorated war hero, to take out this draft dodging bumbler who had gotten us in these dumb wars. And the first thing they do is they swift vote him. In other words, he was a swift vote captain, and they got a buddy who said he was a coward, he didn't do anything, it was all trumped up, and they took away his strength, and then he was more easy to defeat. You can't just say, hey, I grew up in the middle class, vote for me. That's gonna work. You have to go after Donald Trump's strength. If I'm Kamala Harris, what I say is, you guys like, I would say, especially to men, especially to non-college working men, especially Black and Latin. I would say, you guys like Donald Trump. You don't want to admit it. You like him because he's a billionaire. You like him because you think he's successful. You
Right,
like him
aspirational.
yeah, you think he's rich. Can I tell you something? Donald Trump's a little baby broke billionaire. Donald Trump ain't no real billionaire. I'm from California.
So I notice on the right, there's this widespread tendency to think that leftists are idiots, morons, are illogical, that they lack reasoning, that they are removed from reality. But if you spend time listening to the most articulate and thoughtful people on the left, then you recognize that many of them are very smart. Right? Van Jones is very smart, very clear, very powerful communicator. So is Chris Cillizza. Chris Cillizza is on the left. Van Jones is on the left. And there are a lot of people on the left who are more worthy of our attention than the predictable right-wing outrage crowd on Fox News, Talk Radio, and Rumble.
We mass manufacture billionaires in my state. We have Apple, mass manufacturing billionaires. Google, Meta, the real billionaires are from my state, and the amount of money that Donald Trump has is a rounding error for half of. If you want money, the future is not swindly real estate deals and brand deals. The future is technology, and I'm an innovation-first Democrat from an innovation-first state, the biggest economy in the United States. She let her state be defined by San Francisco. She let herself be defined by being from Oakland. That is not going to get people who have a problem. People don't want middle-class people because they're like, well, shit, you're just as broke as me. You're just
right. Why don't you just elect me president?
Exactly. Like, I grew up in a middle-class family. Wonderful. Who did it? How is that going to solve my problem? Is misunderstanding how voters are going to process that.
Here's an incredibly important story if you care about American politics. Chris Cillizza this morning.
And as my kids like to remind me, it's 12 days until Christmas. But it's less than 12 days. In fact, it might just be a week until we get the latest census estimates on population growth in the U.S., which is basically my Christmas. So this usually comes out sort of toward the end of December. And what it is, it's an estimate of state growth from the 2020 census until now. So we're about halfway through the decade. And it gives us a good sense of where population is growing, where it's shrinking, and what that means, most importantly, for redistricting and reapportionment, which will happen in 2030, where we will move around the 435 congressional districts based on population growth and loss. And that obviously impacts electoral votes going forward. Now, what's really interesting about last year, and I'm going to put a few charts in there, but what's really interesting about last year is it showed the decades-long trend of growth in California really, really slowing. And it showed the South, particularly Texas and Florida, growing hugely. 3.9 million people moved into the South broadly. Vast majority of those were Texas and Florida. And that accounted for basically all of the population gain in America between 20 and 2023. Really interesting. Okay, so what does that mean for politics? Okay, a couple of things. One, California, which now has 52 congressional districts, by far the biggest number in the country, is slated to lose. Now, again, we're halfway through the decade, but slated to lose 4 congressional seats, which is gigantic loss for them. New York, which continues to lose congressional seats and has for decades, is slated to lose 3. Illinois, slated to lose 2. And then a few others are going to lose 1. But what's gaining, and this is really important, Texas is going to gain 4. Florida is going to gain 3. And then a panoply of states in the South, North Carolina, Georgia, are slated to gain 1. All right, so what does this mean even more broadly? Well, it suggests the South is becoming sort of our population driver and the hub of our politics, right? Texas could become a state bigger population-wise and with more electoral votes than California by 2040, which isn't that long. And the South, obviously, has become a very reliably Republican area. Yes, Joe Biden won Georgia in 2020. Yes, North Carolina has been competitive.
Okay, you get the point. the United States redistricting is very favorable to Republicans. All right, let's get a burst of Fox News here. Jesse
On
Waters.
the incoming Trump administration with a border wall fire sale. He's scrambling to auction off thousands of unused sections for scrap metal prices. That's right, these wall parts, bought with your tax dollars, have been collecting dust in the desert ever since Biden declared he wouldn't build another foot of wall. And now, Joe's practically giving them away, with opening bids as low as $5 for 20 tons of steel bollards on a website littered with listings. I bet Hunter's already speed dialing a Ukrainian buyer for the old man. Thankfully, Joe's days of sabotage at the border are almost over. Tom Homan says he'll put an end to the fire sale.
After the inauguration, we're going to stop it. But it's shocking to me that, and I saw several articles today and actually an ad, they're selling these things pennies on the dollar of what the taxpayers paid for. Yeah. So there, again, here's an example of them just trying to put us in a bad position and not have that equipment available to us.
Speaking of Homan, the incoming border czar just had a successful meeting with New York City Mayor Eric Adams, with Adams reportedly eyeing an executive order to unravel his sanctuary city policy. Watch.
I saw the cop in him, and he has promised to work with us to target violent, criminal, illegal aliens in this city. We're talking about having agents assigned in the precincts rather than release them straight to the street on this bail reform law, give them to my agents to take care of. So we promised to put our two staffs together and work out the details, but as of yesterday, he's all in. And he's willing to take the hits from the left to do it, because it's the right thing to do. He's putting public safety over politics.
All right, so they're selling the wall for scrap, Martha, and I can't tell if Biden is trying to stick it to Donald Trump or because he realizes he's sticking it to the taxpayer.
Totally. I mean, this is the same thing that happened on the way in. Remember, they were repairing existing walls already?
No,
it was 52 miles of new wall.
That's not true.
You
know better than anybody that that's not true.
She built the wall?
That's been debunked.
In this outfit?
It's not true.
You've been debunked.
She could, though. I could dismantle it and rebuild it. But this is proof that Biden and Kamala Harris do not speak, because in her campaign ads, she was bragging about that border wall. She had pictures of it. She said she's a border state prosecutor who locked people up. And she was all in for Trump's border wall. Now, I think dismantling it and selling it is a metaphor for the end of the Biden presidency.
So I've never paid attention when Kellyanne Conway speaks, but when I heard her on that New York Times panel, it's like, whoa, she, just as Kip said, she is a gifted communicator.
It's broken, they're in bits and pieces, it's cheap. I think the thing that they should be noting is that in every airport that I've been in, the Biden books, the Harris Waltz t-shirts, those are 80% off. You can get those and a piece of the wall. Trump doesn't need this. He's got a mandate from the American people to make us feel safer, more affordable. He's going to build a wall, and more importantly than that, he's going to generously resource and deeply respect Border Patrol, police, law enforcement everywhere. That is part of how he won. I think defund the police was one of the dumbest things that was ever said by the Democratic Party, and now I think people are going to defund the elites.
We have some sound from Tom.
We just want safe streets. American criminals, even bigger, we want the ones who aren't even supposed to be here committing crimes out. So I think that's what this all comes down to. Safe streets for everybody, regardless of citizenship or not.
You know, it was here in New York where it all got broken open, because this is the place where people turned on Fox News, opened up their phones, and saw illegals getting cash, debit cards, clothing, hotel rooms in New York City, and the greatest affront, your kid's desk in a New York City classroom. They said, this isn't fair. In fact, it's outrageous. But it was really here in New York City where the rest of the country saw that happening. Before that, illegal immigration, you could say, well, that's about people. Oh, no. Border security and people getting things that the mom who wants to take a couple kids to the Rockettes but has to drive 4 hours home because she can't afford to stay in the New York City hotel room. Thank you, Bidenomics. She can't afford a new blouse for herself. She can't upgrade her phone. She can't have a little extra cash to put away for a rainy day or do something on a sunny day with the kids. That made a lot of Americans change their mind on this issue and know that it was impacting them directly. I hope that Eric Adams spurs 2, 3, 4 other mayors of blue cities to say, you know what, it's my job to keep us safe. And Homan makes an important point. He said it is a violation of federal law to harbor an illegal alien. That's what these cities are doing. So go ahead and bring in, before you bring in the police to deport, you can bring in the actual federal law and saying you've been violating it every single day.
Is that good politics for the Democrats?
So I got the latest iPhone, and I like the AI feature where you get essentially a text message coming up that gives you a summary of whatever voicemail you've just received. Right, I'm impressed here with Van Jones. Never said that before, but I thought he was excellent on that New York Times panel. I played excerpts from yesterday.
You want somebody who is not middle class, who might be able to get you out the middle class or get you into the middle class and beyond. And so I'm telling you, when you have people who long ago stopped talking to actual working people, they talk about working people in terms of policy. Here's a great policy for working people. But have you ever talked to a working person? Do you talk to people? And what you come to realize is people are very, very smart. People are unbelievably smart.
It's not so much that they're smart. It's just that people did not evolve to be gullible about things that are important to their welfare.
Well, when Kamala Harris gives the same answer 9 times in a row, people who are persuadable voters notice that. They notice that. That's that. Kamala says, yes, I did that because I'm disciplined. No, that might have worked in an era when people couldn't literally look at the last three on YouTube, the last 3 interviews, same answer no matter what the question is. And so a lot of the tricks that used to work before you could Google and YouTube and Instagram everything don't work anymore.
Totally. Because you can see the other thing too, just to your point, it's like, I remember days when it was like the ways that you saw what they said on the campaign trail was on the evening news. There was no other way. Now it's like, if they say something in 10 minutes, you can see it on X or Twitter, Instagram, like everything's.
Yes. And so you have to play a different game. You have to assume that everybody, if you're a magician, everybody's seen that trick before and they know how it works and they've seen 2 YouTube videos on it and they can frankly do it themselves. So what are you going to do? I'm going to push back on that. And that also, now that is very true. Old Diva just said that Trump has a right-wing echo chamber. I'd like to get to that. But before I get to all their machinery, I do want to get to conceptually the Democratic Party establishment, the Democratic Party and progressive elite is way off. They are way off.
So
can
I ask you, you're probably going there anyway, Van, but one of the things that I'm most interested in, like, and you've been pretty outspoken about this, I feel like we've now got 2 paths. There's the Democrats who say like, oh, we didn't really lose by that much. Like, it was like 200,000 votes in 3 states. And like, oh, he didn't even get a majority of the popular vote. He got 49.
Right. That sounds like me when I have some setback and I don't want to engage in painful amounts of change. So I would often say to my therapist, how come I just can't make 1 or 2 tweaks to my life and then have it take off? Right? Why do I have to do the deep, painful, transformational work? And my therapist would encourage me to do the deep, painful, slow, transformational work. And I was eager to do one weird trick, one simple trick to make my life take off. And so Democrats who react to their drubbing in the latest election, they're just like Luke Ford, who doesn't want to do the deep, painful inner work, doesn't want to do the slow, transformational inner work to come to grips with the extent to which I am responsible for my own dysfunction and pain, and instead just grasping for that one weird trick, one simple trick. Give me that one easy trick. Just give me one new tactic that will help me transform my life. And my therapist would urge me, go deeper, young man. Go deeper.
9.81%. I'm like, well, Tammy Baldwin won.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side that I think you're more like, dude, there are problems here. Like, can you tell me how when you looked at that election, you're on TV, you're watching it through. Tell me sort of how you've processed that and where you are on like the Democratic brand. Like, is it a issue that fixes itself? Is it an issue that needs to be fixed? And if it's the second, how do you fix it? Like, what you're thinking?
The Democratic Party, and if it were just the Democratic Party that was totally off the Democratic Party is in a ditch, upside down, with wheels spinning, going nowhere on fire.
That's an image.
And the people driving are saying, "This is fine. This is fine."
That's what I think too.
So no, look. If they can keep drinking their own pee water if they want to, I decline. Okay, I would be much more interested in having an honest conversation. Let's have an honest conversation about what went wrong. And I'm going to get to my friend's comment about
I want to get to the Trump. Let's get to that too. Let's do this and then that.
But we need to look at if it were just the Democratic Party that was all screwed up, that would be one thing. It's the entire establishment. It's not. It's the so-called mainstream media. It's most of the academy. It's the whole thing. And I can say it with some.
So a big transformation in my understanding of reality was when I came to take an evolutionary perspective that we have genetic tendencies that translate into different political tendencies, and that different types of politics, right-wing versus left-wing, egalitarian versus hierarchical, openness to strangers versus xenophobic police state, that different types of politics are more or less adaptive depending on the situation. And the reason that so many people are on the left is that we have numerous examples in our evolutionary past where left-wing tendencies were more adaptive than right-wing tendencies. And the reason that so many people are on the right politically, so we have numerous examples from the past where right-wing tendencies were more adaptive than left-wing tendencies. And there is a tremendous amount of luck in whether or not you are going to be successful. I was just watching this documentary about Liz Truss, and she only lasted 44 days as the British Prime Minister, and it may well be due to some bad luck that a change in circumstance doomed her prime ministership in the United Kingdom. Right, the prime minister versus the blob. Right, Liz Truss's 44 days in office.
Her and in her cabinet.
Wall Street Journal. This is Potomac Watch.
Can conservatives really change the course of government in a modern democracy? Donald Trump is going to try with the help of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and their Department of Government Efficiency, but they'll face enormous obstacles in the permanent bureaucracy, the press corps, and of course, Washington interest groups. An example of what they'll contend with is the story of Liz Truss, the prime minister for 44 days, all of 44 days in the United Kingdom. Her story is the subject of a new documentary by WSJ Opinion called The Prime Minister versus the Blob, and that's our subject for today on Potomac Watch. Welcome, I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of the Wall Street Journal editorial page.
So I started reading the Wall Street Journal regularly in the 1980s, and the Wall Street Journal editorial line reflected my politics really up until the age of Trump.
And I'm here with Michael Pack, the producer of the documentary and our collaborator on Opinion Docs, plus Joe Sternberg, our columnist based in London, who informed the story and is featured as a commentator in the documentary. Welcome, Michael and Joe. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having us on, Paul.
Michael, this is our second Opinion documentary. The first, released earlier this fall, was on the Crown Heights riots in New York City. This is our second one. Tell our audience, why tell the story of Liz Truss?
I think it's particularly relevant now. I mean, it's called The Prime Minister versus the Blob because she feels she was defeated, at least in part, by the British version of the administrative state or the swamp, which they call the blob.
Right. If you're not powerful enough to overcome the blob or reality or those that have the power in your life, then it's usually a bad strategy to run as fast as you can towards getting defeated.
Which is a way better term, and it's catching on a little bit over here. This film tells the story of her 44 days in office. We have a long interview with Liz Truss, but we have many of her critics, both inside the Tory party and in Labour and in her cabinet. So it's a complicated story. I relied on Joe Sternberg, to guide me through the complications of it all. And I say that this story, in addition to having lessons for Donald Trump in dealing with our version of the blob, we say they're going to try to do to him what they did to Liz Truss. I think it's also a great story. I say it combines a little bit of Yes Minister and a little bit of House of Cards. So it's a great political story.
Nobody was shot, though.
It's tempting to just think of British TV as just simply superior. Yes Minister was just such a great TV series. All right, the British have produced so much excellent, thoughtful, highbrow TV. It's hard not to be an Anglophile.
Along the way that I remember, although politically speaking, certainly Liz Truss was among some others. From my point of view, it's also a story of modern conservative politics, especially in Europe, where the right can be as much averse to change as the left and to go along with big government and favor the status quo. But let's maybe define the term blob, and let's listen to Liz Truss, how she defines it.
I think the blob describes wider than just the government. It's a groupthink shared by senior media executives, senior corporate executives, civil servants. Wouldn't it be better if experts and technocrats were running everything? That's a whole shared belief system. Big spending, big government, big taxes, big immigration.
Well, Joe, the conventional wisdom about Truss is that she tried radical tax cutting. It blew up the bond market and collapsed the British pound, and then failed inevitably because the policies were mistaken. The real story is a lot more complex, and it's told in this documentary. Why don't you give us an insight into why you think it's more complicated?
Well, I mean, you basically ran into the confluence of a bunch of different forces. I mean, what part of the problem here was just basic economic. The British economy had been struggling for a long time. It had been underperforming. You know, some good years after the 2008 global financial panic had masked some fundamental weaknesses, especially very weak.
Right. If you're on the right in American politics, you probably applauded Brexit. But if you're open to evidence, it seems indisputably clear that Britain is far poorer and faces a far more grim future because of Brexit.
Productivity and wage growth. And so, you know, voters were already intuiting that there was a deep problem with the economy that helped explain the Brexit referendum in 2016. So that's one factor that's going on. Politically, you had a problem that, as you pointed out a minute ago, Paul, you had the main center-right party, the Conservatives or the Tories, had lost their way on a lot of these economic issues. They had lost the muscle memory that they had had from the 1980s and the Thatcher era for how to talk about economic growth, how to develop the economy. And then you had some of these special issues that no one necessarily saw coming at the beginning. For example, financial fragilities that...
So prior to Donald Trump, I was all about free markets, deregulation, cutting taxes, right? All these Reagan-esque economic policies. And I didn't have a strong view on how much I wanted America to intervene in the wider world, but that's where I was coming from prior to about 2014, when I started reading more Steve Sailer.
Develop over a long period when you have had a very weak economy and a bunch of other economic policies that are creating more distortions than they are economic growth. And so you kind of ended up with this confluence of forces.
Art Bell says, Luke, that was the boldest you ever were with your viewership. If you're on my every live stream, you are likely losing at live. Man, that's super harsh. So I was asking my viewers, are you primarily an under-earner, or are you more of a porn addict?
Where all of a sudden you have this politician trying to come in as if from outside of this very closed ecosystem with a completely different set of ideas, which are not at all crazy, because this was the kind of policy prescription that had worked in the UK and the US in the 90s.
So I don't think there's any strong right-wing ideology that I'm most aligned with, just as it's not one branch of Orthodox Judaism that I'm most aligned with. I respect most varieties of the Orthodox Jewish practice. I respect many different varieties of right-wing political thought. Sometimes think I'm perhaps more of a paleocon than any other particular right-wing ideology. I'm definitely on the right, but probably a biological evolutionary person in my right-wing thinking. I'm probably closest aligned to Steve Sailer out of any political pundit. Okay, Van Jones here.
Confidence, because I spend a lot of time with all these people, and I'm going to tell you. Somebody asked me, did the media misread the electorate?
People ask me all the time.
And I said, hold on a second. I said, that's not even a fair question, because there used to be a time back in the day, I'm going somewhere. There used to be a time back in the day that they would cut a pig open and they would throw the pig entrails on the ground to try to read and divine the future, right? It'd be like asking, do you think that you misread the pig entrails?
Wait a second. So the media was telling us that the 2024 election was 50-50 up until election day, when if you knew about what private polls were showing for both political parties, you knew that Donald Trump had a significant lead in the battleground states and was significantly likely to win the election for many months prior to election day. So if you're listening to Mark Halperin's show, you knew in advance that the odds were strongly in Donald Trump's favor.
We were so off. We weren't reading the
universe.
We weren't.
I don't recall one news article about the difference between public polls and private polls. I can't think of any topic more important for understanding politics and this election, right? Private polls are significantly more funded and significantly more accurate than public polls. And yet we have hundreds of news media articles and academic studies about whether the polls got it right or wrong, but they never seem to distinguish, to the best of my knowledge, the profound, important difference between public polls and private polls. Public polls are out there for everyone to see, and then private polls are usually paid for by political parties, and they are much more expensive than public polls. They are much more thorough, and they are much more accurate. Right? The information that political parties have with regard to the polls is far more granular, far more accurate than public polls. But if you weren't following Mark Halperin, right, how would you know? I don't believe the New York Times, Washington Post, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, CNN, CBS News ever mentioned the significant difference between public polls and private polls, and how private polls were consistently showing for months prior to the election that Donald Trump was doing about 2 points better in the battleground states than public polls were consistently showing. So if you're listening to Mark Halperin, you knew for months in advance that Donald Trump was overwhelmingly likely to sweep the battleground states and to win the election. And yet for all the hundreds of articles about the 2024 election, I can't think of one in the mainstream media that explains the important difference between public polls and private polls.
We weren't reading the actual electorate at all. For instance, we were using completely outdated terms and modes of analysis and concepts like...
Not Mark Halperin, right? Not many of the political operatives that he talked to and even had on his show. They weren't doing this.
Swing voter, moderate voter, male voter, female voter. None of that stuff is what Donald Trump's team was focused on. What Donald Trump did, he ran a masculinist cultural movement. We ran a political campaign. These are
Donald Trump had about somewhere between 1/2 to 1/3 as much money as the Kamala Harris campaign. And his campaign went for men who rarely vote. Right? They made a very targeted approach using ads on streaming platforms to go after men who don't vote. And if there was going to be a big female turnout, then Kamala Harris was likely to win. But if the female turnout was only 52% or 53%, then Donald Trump was likely to win. And Donald Trump, in both 2016 and in 2024, right, he used his campaign dollars to highly effectively.
Completely different things. A masculinist or male-centered cultural movement is not the same as a political campaign. That's why everything he did, we were confused by. But look at what he actually did. He went and got certain subcultures. You mentioned one of them, the UFC fighting.
Yep.
The whole subculture. Wrestling's the whole subculture.
Yep.
He went and pulled them into his tent. He talked to them.
All right, Van Jones is nailing it here, but if you want more of the technical details, you can find it in this New York Times article from December 5.
How Trump targeted undecided voters without breaking the bank. This article is by Shane Goldmacher and read by an automated voice. Donald J. Trump's super PAC called them the streaming persuadables. It was shorthand for some of the most important voters of the 2024 election, the sliver of truly undecided voters who they believed skewed young and diverse, and disproportionately
If you want to keep track of the most important articles about politics, then subscribe to the free version of Mark Halperin's Substack. And he links usually every morning to the most important political articles that have just come out. Now, he also runs a version of his Substack that I think charges $2,000 a month. just for political prose. But the free version, along with his twice daily show, is superb.
Consumed content on streaming services like Max, Tubi, and Roku. Both broadcast and cable television allow campaigns to advertise almost exclusively by where voters live or what programs they are watching. But many of the ascendant streaming services and smart TVs allow advertisers to be far more precise, down to picking specific individuals to serve ads to. How the leading Trump super PAC and his campaign targeted these streamers provided a critical yet unseen edge in Mr. Trump's sweeping victory last month. It helped the Trump team make up for Kamala Harris' mammoth financial advantage and narrow its dollars and focus on the roughly 14% of battleground state voters it had identified as swayable. The Harris side, awash in cash, mostly ran streaming television ads the old-fashioned way.
So some discussion about regular on this show, Kip, in the chat, and talking to Kip reminds me of all sorts of things that I'd never think of. Right, only come to mind when Kip brings them up, because I'm a different person when I'm just talking to a Cam, when I'm talking to Joe or to Heather or to Sarah or to Peter. Right, I'm a different person, and they activate different parts of me, and they help me as I interact with them, help me become aware of different parts of life. So I get all sorts of ideas and blinding insights only when I'm talking to Kip. Right, he brings out the best in me.
Targeting by geography. In the 7 states, we were talking to 6.3 million people. They were talking to 44.7 million, explained David Lee, a top pollster for the super PAC, Make America Great Again, Inc. There's roughly 38 million people that they're hitting who've already made up their mind, so I don't care how much more money you have than us to spend, you're wasting 85% of your money. Practically every presidential election brings about a technological leap or innovation in how campaigns target key voters. The re-election campaign of George W. Bush pioneered using the partisan tilt of...
Okay, you get it, how Trump targeted undecided voters without breaking the bank. This is what Van Jones is talking about here.
He treated them seriously, and by the numbers, that is as big as baseball. That's
oh gosh, yes.
Exactly, and guess what? Uncontested. Then he went and got the crypto folks. Now, 50 million Americans have bought crypto in the past 5 years. Every one of them is buying a lottery ticket for the future.
So I think crypto is a scam. I don't think crypto makes any important contributions, but appealing to people who have hope in scams might well be a very effective political play, appears to have been for Trump.
Every one of those purchases is a prayer for a better tomorrow. And what do the Democrats do? Biden, Harris, Elizabeth Warren beat the hell out of crypto for 4 years.
So in traditional Orthodox life, I know many people who buy stocks or buy crypto to provide avenues for God to bless them. So the thinking is, if I just provide more opportunities for God to sweep in and provide abundance and blessing to my life, that's why I'm buying stock or buying crypto.
Years. Just beat the hell out of crypto for 4 years. And so he went and spoke to them and got them. He's grabbing subcultures. Is that a moderate voter? Is that a
right? It's not even on that spectrum that we're talking about, right? It's like up here.
Yeah, it's orthogonal to all of that, okay? And then he went and got. Now here's the other thing that's criminal on the part of the Democrats. He goes and gets the health and wellness people with RFK.
Yep.
Now don't forget Michelle Obama used.
You want to learn to be an effective communicator? Van Jones is about as good as you can get. Oh, what the hell! I just completely blew the timestamp. Let's see if I can get it back.
Our convention was fantastic. She was beating a past cultural movement, big as baseball.
Oh gosh, yes.
Exactly. And guess what? To them and got them. He's grabbing subcultures. Is that a moderate voter? Is that a
right? It's not even on that spectrum that we're talking about, right? It's like up here.
Yeah, it's orthogonal to all of that. Okay, and then.
So I was watching football games every Sunday, and every 30 minutes on an NFL game, there was a Trump ad about Kamala Harris supporting the state paying for transgender surgery for illegals and other criminals, and finishing with saying, Kamala's for they, them, Donald Trump is for you.
Then he went and got. Now here's the other thing that's criminal on the part of the Democrats. He goes and gets the health and wellness people with RFK.
Yep.
Now don't forget Kamala Harris. not Kamala Harris, Michelle Obama used to own the health and wellness space, and the right wing beat her up. But after COVID, the health and wellness space went from it. Now, this is not a criteria that our friends in the media talk about. They didn't go from left to right. They went from a high trust community to a low trust community. Okay? The people who believe in health and wellness after COVID, they used to be high trust and aspirational. And then after COVID, they said, look, I don't trust anything. I don't trust anything. And so a low trust health and wellness culture, and RFK Jr. is a great spokesperson for that.
Absolutely.
Now, look at what nobody's been willing to admit. This is why these people, you can just throw them in the garbage can. Kamala Harris was beating Donald Trump coming out of that convention. Our convention was fantastic. She was beating the pants off of him until RFK endorsed Trump.
Oh, that's so interesting, because it was totally painted as a like.
Okay, that you might get to that from the public polls, but private polls from a year in advance of the election and consistently, week after week, month after month, the private polls showed that Donald Trump was in a very good position to win. So I don't think that RFK Jr. was a significant factor in Donald Trump's victory. And RFK Jr. is definitely on the left. I am not a fan of RFK Jr. I understand if it's a pragmatic payoff to move him into HHS, but I would rather that RFK Jr. was not part of Trump's cabinet. I would rather that Pete Hegseth was not part of Trump's cabinet.
I mean, this guy like ran as a Democrat, he ran as an independent. He's a black sheep of the family. It's not a big deal.
You'll go back and look. Click.
Interesting.
As soon as RFK Jr. endorsed Donald Trump, it was over, because now he has three masculinist subcultures. He has the WWE, UFC,
yep.
people. He's got the crypto people, and then all the guys, the gym influencers, all the people who want health and wellness and fitness, and all their girlfriends who are into yoga and kale but don't trust big food and don't trust big pharma. They all moved over, and you saw it on Instagram. You saw it on social media, and the Democrats and the progressives are sitting on TV laughing about it. And so listen, this is over, folks. It is over. You have to completely erase the chalkboard, because even the criteria by which we were discussing the election was wrong. It wasn't that our criteria was right and our conclusions were wrong. Our conclusions were wrong because our criteria was wrong.
Correct. What you were putting in the car was the problem.
What?
What you were putting, the gas you were putting in.
Okay.